Chapter 35-53. The Battle of Two Hearts, the Sword in the Sky and the Bodhi Bead. The Battle of Two Hearts was about to begin. Nye Tian, I am the reason why you were able to activate the sword in the sky. The Bodhi child's face was dark as he said, if the heart of heaven and earth and the Bodhi heart did not resonate, you would not have been able to activate the sky sword. Therefore, your sky sword should have been mine. Is that so? Nye Tian's lips twitched and he sneered. If it wasn't for the resonance, would your Bodhi bead have been activated? Though he didn't know what the sword in the sky and the Bodhi bead were, he knew that the resonance was mutual. Without the heart of sky, the Bodhi child's Bodhi heart might not have been able to activate the Bodhi bead. According to the Bodhi child, the Bodhi bead should have been Nye Tian's. You are smart. The Bodhi child's face darkened and he smiled cold. He was able to activate the Bodhi bead because of the resonance. Without the resonance, he could have activated the Bodhi bead as well. But he didn't know how long it would have taken. Nye Tian was indeed smart. With one look, he realized that the resonance had benefited both of them. Nye Tian, someone like you does not deserve the heart of heaven and earth. The Bodhi child smiled cold. With a thought, the Bodhi bead emitted a holy light. The Buddha's light opened the sky, magnificent and holy. Rays of Buddhist light shone in the void, illuminating the heavens and earth, incomparably magnificent. However, when the Bodhi seed was bathed in this holy light, his entire being became incomparably gloomy and cold, and a terrifying killing intent emanated from his body. In my opinion, a sinister and vicious person like you is the one who doesn't deserve to have a Bodhi heart. Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he felt the vast Buddha light, and he said coldly. The Buddha's light contained a holy aura, but the Bodhi child was using this power to kill. This was blasphemy against the Bodhi heart. Die. The Bodhi child's expression sank. With a low roar, the Bodhi bead released a blinding Buddhist light, condensing into a palm of Buddhist light that pressed towards Nye Tian. Nye Tianling stood in the void and immediately felt the overwhelming pressure, causing his expression to change. He hadn't expected that the Bodhi pearl would be able to unleash such terrifying power in the hands of the Bodhi seed. Saint heaven-defying sword, sun's sacrifice. In the next moment, the sky sword in his hand slashed across the sky, and he used the unity of man and nature move. Suddenly, the sword light in the sky whistled, like a waterfall of flowing light, shining in the sky. The light covered the sky, and the sword will shook the air. What kind of power is this? When Wenren Xiang saw this scene from afar, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but tremble. The shock in her heart was perfectly written on her face. She could sense that the energy aura in the air was extremely strange, making her feel extremely uneasy. It seemed to be a power that surpassed the saint energy. It was extremely terrifying. She was very puzzled. Why did another sword appear in Nye Tian's hand out of nowhere? Moreover, this sword seemed to be more powerful, and it was more compatible with Nye Tian's sword will. Boom! At this moment, the palm of Buddhist light collided with the sword light in the sky. Suddenly, there was a roar in the air, and a terrifying power surged in all directions, wreaking havoc as if it wanted to annihilate everything. The sword light and the Buddhist light reflected off each other, colliding with each other. In the chaotic space there was a dazzling scene. In the midst of the dazzling light, Nye Tian's figure hurriedly retreated, flying thousands of meters away, and then stabilizing himself. The Bodhi seed didn't move at all. It was like a boulder in the midst of a violent storm, unmoving despite the wind and rain hitting it. This guy is so strong. Nye Tian frowned, looking at the Bodhi seed from afar, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. The Bodhi seed didn't dodge, letting the terrifying power hit him, and he wasn't injured at all. The strength of his martial body was unimaginable. Even Nye Tian couldn't come out unscathed under the impact of this power. It seemed that the Bodhi seed's martial body was even stronger than Nye Tian's. and the Bodhi seed's strength was only at the 5th layer of heavenly rhythm, only 2 layers higher than Yetian. Without a doubt, the Bodhi seed was the most talented person Yetian had met since he came to the holy world. Die! At that moment, the Bodhi seed let out a low roar as the Bodhi pearl revolved around him. Streams of Buddha light swirled around him, making him look like the light of heaven and earth. However, in the next moment, the endless Buddha light converged in midair, and a golden giant appeared. It was an enormous Buddha, and it charged towards Nyetian. Nyetian couldn't help but change his expression when he felt the fluctuation of Buddhist light. The Bodhi seed was too terrifying. He had only just activated the Bodhi pearl, but he could already use the power of the Bodhi pearl so skillfully. In his hand, the Bodhi pearl seemed to be able to release endless power. Nyetian, watch out! In the distance, Wenren Xiang saw the enormous Buddha body pressing down on Nyetian, and couldn't help but let out a cry of terror. Starry Sky 9 limits, 5th limit moonfall. At this moment, Nyetian roared and released his sword intent crazily. Suddenly, the sword in the sky shone brightly, and the light from the sword shot out tens of thousands of meters. Boom! In the next moment, an enormous sword shadow appeared in front of Nyetian, standing in the void. It was incomparably mighty, and its aura was extremely terrifying, as if it could tear the sky apart. Boom! Then, the sword shadow moved and pressed towards the giant Buddha. Suddenly, the surrounding space sank, as if it was going to collapse. Boom! Bang bang bang! The sword shadow landed directly on the Buddha's body. The heavens and earth froze for a moment. Then, a terrifying power was released, like a raging wave, and the sky was filled with dazzling light. Under the impact of the crazy power, Nyetian's figure retreated again. However, the terrifying power left horrifying wounds on his body. The power of the Bodhi pearl was too strong. Even though Nyetian's martial body was strong, he couldn't resist it. However, the wounds weren't too deep, so it wasn't a big deal. Nyetian, is the power of the sky sword in his hand only this little? At this moment, the Bodhi seed roared. It was incomparably arrogant, and its aura surged wildly. Suddenly, the Buddhist light on its body became even brighter, as if it was going to cover the heavens and earth. Nyetian steadied himself and looked at the Bodhi seed. He couldn't help but stare. The Bodhi seed's martial body was indeed very strong, far exceeding Nyetian's expectations. It had to be said that the Bodhi seed's martial body was indeed very strong, far exceeding Nyetian's expectations. Nyetian, let me show you the true power of the Bodhi pearl. More terrifyingly, the aura of the Bodhi seed was still increasing. Rays of holy light shot up to the sky. Outside the body of the Bodhi seed, a golden Buddha that was hundreds of meters tall appeared. Its majestic aura made people's hearts tremble. Nyetian couldn't help but be stunned, and his expression changed. He didn't expect the Bodhi pearl to be able to explode with such terrifying power. Chapter 35-54. We owe each other nothing, The sudden change in the situation caused Nyetian's eyes to flicker as he exclaimed in surprise. The Bodhi seed's aura was clearly skyrocketing. Why did it suddenly spit out blood? His face darkened as he used his divine sense to probe the Bodhi seed. His heart skipped a beat. He could sense two terrifying forces clashing against each other within the Bodhi seed's body, as if they were trying to tear his martial physique apart. One of the two forces came from the Bodhi seed's Buddha heart, while the other came from the Bodhi seed's Yuan meridian. What's going on? Nyetian frowned, a confused expression on his face. Why would the power of the Bodhi seed's Buddha heart and the Bodhi seed's Yuan meridian clash? The power of the Bodhi seed's Buddha heart is extremely sacred, but he has cultivated a type of darkness martial technique. The power contained within his Yuan meridian is the power of darkness. The Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. He used the power of his Yuan meridian to forcefully activate the power of the Bodhi seed, causing the Bodhi seed to resist. So that's how it is. Nye Tian frowned as his expression changed. Nye Tian, actually, the power of the heart of the sky and the demon god force in your body are extremely conflicting. However, you have the power of the stars, which allows you to contain all kinds of forces. Otherwise, you would be in even more trouble than him. The Ghost Emperor frowned and said in a deep voice. Nye Tian nodded his head slightly, but his heart remained silent. The power of the stars was the source of power. It filled Nye Tian's meridians, bones, and flesh. Therefore, even though there were several conflicting forces in his body, he was still able to coexist peacefully. However, the Bodhi seed was different. He did not have something like the star primary stone, so it was impossible for him to prevent the power of his Yuan meridian and the power of the Buddha heart from clashing. At that instant, the Bodhi seed suddenly roared into the sky as if he had gone mad. The power in his body surged violently as it surged into the sky. Nye Tian frowned as his expression changed slightly. Ghost Emperor, what will happen to him? Although the Bodhi child was vicious and merciless, he was still someone who possessed the Buddha heart. It would be too much of a pity if he died just like that. The Ghost Emperor smiled and said, "Don't worry, he won't die. He'll just be in pain for a while. His martial body is even stronger than what you see." Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he was shocked. From what he saw, Bodhi Z's martial body was already very strong. However, the Ghost Emperor said that Bodhi Z's martial body was even stronger. It seemed that he had underestimated this person. This person can fuse with the Bodhi Buddhist heart. How can he be ordinary? His current martial body is not much weaker than your God-fiend body state. The Ghost Emperor said in a deep voice with a strange smile on his face. Nye Tian looked at the Bodhi seed and did not step forward. Moments later, the Bodhi seed regained its calm. Its aura gradually dissipated, but its face was extremely pale and unsightly. "What's going on?" The Bodhi seed's expression was gloomy as he murmured. Eyebrows furrowed, Nye Tian repeated the Ghost Emperor's words. "Could it be that I won't be able to use the Bodhi beads in the future?" The Bodhi seed's face was gloomy. He had felt the conflict between his Yuan meridian and the Buddha heart. If he forcefully used the Bodhi beads, it would cause great damage to his Yuan meridian. Moreover, the stronger the energy released by the Bodhi beads, the more damage his Yuan meridian would suffer. The Bodhi beads contain holy energy, but you use them to kill. It's inevitable that they clash. Nye Tian looked at the Bodhi seed and said coldly. "Why?" The Bodhi seed suddenly raised his head and said coldly, "Why is there so much energy in your body, but you can use it so freely?" Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he replied coldly, "That's my problem." The Bodhi seed's perception was very strong. First, he sensed the heaven-punishing demonic qi in Nye Tian's body. Now, he sensed several other energies coexisting together. Nye Tian was shocked. The Bodhi seed wasn't strong, but how could he have such terrifying perception? The Bodhi seed's face was gloomy. After a long time, he said, "Nye Tian, there will be a battle of life and death between us, but not today." Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, "Whenever you want to fight, I'll be there to keep you company." The Bodhi seed was injured, and he didn't want to take advantage of him. Moreover, he could see that the Bodhi seed was hiding too many secrets. "Bodhi seed, I want to enter the Night Wolf Valley to take something." Then, Nye Tian nodded and prepared to enter the Night Wolf Valley. "Is it this?" The Bodhi seed took a step forward, and a fiery red flower appeared in his hand. It was extremely beautiful and looked very evil. "Is this the Nocturnal Wolf's holy flame?" Nye Tian asked as he looked at the strange flower. "Yes." The Bodhi seed nodded and said, "You came to the Night Wolf Valley for the Night Wolf Holy Flame, right? This Night Wolf Holy Flame has absorbed a large amount of the Bodhi Heart's power. It was this Night Wolf Holy Flame that attracted the Blood Flame Wolves here." "So that's how it is." Nye Tian's eyes darkened as he understood. He sensed that the Night Wolf Holy Flame's aura was very similar to the Blood Flame Wolves, so it must have greatly improved the blood flame wolf's power. No wonder a pack of blood flame wolves surrounded the Night Wolf Valley. This Night Wolf Holy Flame had absorbed the Bodhi Heart's power, so it should be more precious than ordinary Night Wolf Holy Flames. A gift for you. The Bodhi Seed tossed the Night Wolf Holy Flame over to him. Nye Tian caught the Night Wolf Holy Flame and was stunned for a moment. Then, he said, "Thank you. You helped me stop the Blood Flame Wolves, so I'll give you the Night Wolf Holy Flame. From now on, we don't owe each other anything. The next time we meet, you and I will be enemies." The Bodhi Seed's face was gloomy. Nye Tian frowned and couldn't help but smile wryly. The Bodhi Seed was really a strange person. He was unpredictable. Nye Tian didn't say anything else. After receiving the Night Wolf Holy Flame, he prepared to leave. However, just at this moment, a cry suddenly rang out. Nye Tian's eyes trembled, and he quickly turned around to see a black-robed cultivator appear in the distant void. And Wenren Xiang had fallen into the hands of the cultivator in black. "Damn it!" Nye Tian roared. His figure moved instantly, rushing towards the cultivator in black. Boom! 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 But at the same time, several tyrannical auras appeared in the sky. They suddenly descended and charged towards him. Nye Tian was in the air. He couldn't help but tremble. After a cry of surprise, he released his sword intent. A terrifying sword aura soared into the sky. The resplendent sword light shot tens of thousands of meters away. A huge sword shadow rushed into the sky like a wild dragon. Chapter 35:55. They don't deserve it. How is this possible? The man in black was shocked by the bloody scene in front of him and couldn't help but exclaim. All of the black-robed martial practitioners Nye Tian had killed were at the 9th level of Heaven Rime. How could Nye Tian be so terrifying? He killed warriors in the 9th Heaven Yun realm, as if he was slaughtering chickens and dogs with his 3rd Heaven Yun realm cultivation. In the distance, the Bodhi Seed could not help but frown when he saw this. He was extremely surprised. As expected of someone who possessed the heart of Haotian, Nye Tian's moves were extraordinary. "Brat, if you dare to take even half a step closer, I'll kill her." At this moment, the black-clothed man saw Nye Tian rushing over and directly shouted. He was holding Wenren Xiang in his hand and was full of murderous intent. Nye Tian came to a stop in midair and bellowed, "How dare you? You can try." The black-robed cultivator sneered, his eyes incomparably cold. However, in front of Nye Tian, he couldn't hide the fear on his face. He was at the 1st level of the Heavenly Mandate realm, but he felt a real threat from Nye Tian. Just now, Nye Tian's sword strike had been so terrifying that even he couldn't have withstood it. "Let him go," Nye Tian said coldly, his face filled with killing intent, his eyes brimming with a frightening coldness. At this moment, as long as he willed it, the extreme demon annihilation seal would be able to kill the man in black before him. However, it was too wasteful to use the extreme demon seal on someone like this. The man in black was obviously afraid of Nye Tian and wouldn't dare to do anything to Wenren Xiang. "Kid, do you think I'm a fool?" The black-clothed man sneered, and his eyes flickered with a strange light. He naturally knew that Wenren Xiang was his shield, and if she were to be lost, he would lose his life. "Who are you?" Nye Tian asked coldly, his eyes as grim as killing intent. However, he seemed much calmer than before. "Soul-severing sect." The corners of the man in black's mouth twitched as he coldly uttered a name. "So you're here for me." When Nye Tian heard this name, he couldn't help but smile cold. When he had challenged the Heavenly Wolf, he had killed a disciple of the Severing Soul Sect's sect master. Thus, he had formed an irreconcilable feud with the Severing Soul Sect. At that time, the Severing Soul Sect master had wanted to kill him, but he had been stopped by Su Qing. It looked like the people of the Soul Extinguishing Sect had been watching him all this time, and now they had found their way here. "Brat, obediently follow me to see our sect leader." I guarantee that this little girl will be fine. The black-clothed man smiled cold and said in a deep voice, You dare to threaten me? The corner of Nye Tion's mouth twitched, his eyes flashing with killing intent. Then you are forcing me to kill. The black-clothed man's face darkened, and his entire body surged with a terrifying killing intent. He really wanted to kill Wenren Xiang. Whoosh! However, at that moment there was a sudden sound of something breaking through the air. Then, an extremely sharp sword light flashed. The black-clothed cultivator didn't even have time to react before his head was chopped off. Huh! This sudden scene caused Nye Tion's expression to change as he exclaimed in surprise. Then, he turned around and looked at the Bodhi seed. He couldn't hide the shock on his face. He hadn't expected that the Bodhi seed's sword intent would be so sharp. He hadn't expected the Bodhi seed's sword intent to be so sharp. The Bodhi seed was known as the blind sword. The most terrifying thing about him was his sword intent. It wasn't strange that he had such strength. However, it was indeed surprising that he would save Wenren Xiang. The Bodhi seed stood in the air with a gloomy expression. He didn't say anything. Nye Tian. At that moment, Wenren Xiang, who had just escaped, ran towards Nye Tian in shock. It's okay. Nye Tian nodded slightly and comforted Wenren Xiang. It's okay. But on the other side, the Bodhi seed sneered and said, Nye Tian, your troubles have just begun. Nye Tian's eyebrows furrowed as his heart sank, and he suddenly had a bad premonition. Then, a moment later, dozens of black-clothed cultivators appeared in the distant air. They arrived beside Nye Tian and the others in an instant. These black-clothed cultivators had a very strong aura. They were all heavenly mandate saint masters. Dozens of black-clothed cultivators stood coldly in the air, staring at Nye Tian. Obviously, they had come for him. Nye Tian. Wenren Xiang's beautiful eyes trembled when she saw this. She was obviously very afraid. You enter the 9 superbs first. Nye Tian's eyes darkened slightly. He directly let Wenren Xiang enter the 9 superbs. Wenren Xiang wouldn't be able to help in the upcoming battle. Instead, she would become a burden. Nye Tian. At this time, a black-clothed figure stepped out in the air. The air sank as if it was about to collapse. Sect leader of the Severing Soul sect. Nye Tian's eyes trembled when he saw that person. The person who appeared in front of him was actually the sect leader of the Severing Soul sect. You killed my disciple. Do you still think you can leave here alive? The sect leader of the Severing Soul sect smiled coldly. His eyes flashed with a cold light. He was as fierce as a wolf. You want to kill me? Do you have the ability to do so? Nye Tianling smiled coldly, not afraid at all. You're just a disciple of the divine path. How dare you be so arrogant in front of me? You're asking for death. The sect leader of the Severing Soul sect smiled cold and then stepped out. His aura pressed down wildly like a raging wave, enveloping Nye Tian. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He suddenly felt an overwhelming pressure. In the next moment, his sword aura exploded wildly, and a sword shadow shot into the sky. Boom! The terrifying aura fell, and suddenly the air trembled. The heavens and the earth became solemn, and the air rumbled. That sword shadow actually blocked the aura of the Severing Soul sect leader. The sect leader's eyes darkened, and his expression changed. He was shocked. He was a heavenly mandate 9th tier Saint Master. Under the pressure of his aura, even a heavenly charm 9th tier warrior would be instantly killed. But Nye Tian was actually able to resist the pressure of his aura. How could he not be surprised? He had left the wolf slave farm too early and did not see Nye Tian's performance afterward. Otherwise, he would not have been so surprised by Nye Tian's strength. Boy, I'd like to see how long you can last. In the next moment, the sect leader of the Severing Soul sect leader's mouth suddenly twitched. He smiled cold and growled, "Attack!" The warriors in black behind him reacted. Their expressions changed, and their eyes were full of murderous intent. Boom! Boom. In the next moment, dozens of black-robed martial artists launched attacks towards Nietian. Shameless! Nietian's eyes trembled. He growled and his expression changed. He did not expect the sect leader of the Severing Soul sect to be so shameless. He used his aura to suppress him, and then dozens of Heavenly Mandate Realm warriors attacked him together. A Heavenly Mandate 9th tier Saint Master used such despicable means to kill a Heavenly Charm 3rd tier Saint Disciple. It was indeed shameless. At this time, a series of terrifying attacks whistled and were about to fall on Nietian. Boom! At this time, a huge sword shadow suddenly appeared in the void. It pressed down like a huge mountain, blocking in front of Nietian. Bang, bang, bang. Then, the attacks fell and were all blocked by the sword shadow. Bodhi Seed. Nietian's eyes narrowed. He turned around and saw that the one who attacked was Bodhi Seed. Chapter 35:56. The blazing 9 blades. The Bodhi Seed was like a peerless sword, standing coldly in the void, extremely powerful. He had blocked the attacks of dozens of Heavenly Mandate Realm cultivators by himself. His combat strength was evident. In his opinion, these people in front of him were not qualified to kill Nietian. Only he, the Bodhi Seed, was qualified to kill Nietian. Huh! The sudden change made the face of the sect master of the Severing Soul sect darken. His extremely cold eyes suddenly locked onto the Bodhi Seed. When he confirmed the strength of the Bodhi Seed, his face became extremely gloomy. He did not expect that such a monstrous swordsman would appear at this time. The next moment, the sect master of the Severing Soul sect ordered in a cold tone, "Kill him!" Yes. Dozens of Severing Soul assassins answered in unison. Their momentum was so great that it shook the heavens and the earth. Immediately, dozens of Heavenly Mandate Realm cultivators moved together and attacked the Bodhi Seed. The Bodhi Seed's strength was superb, but he had been seriously injured in the previous battle with Nietian. At this time, facing the siege of dozens of Heavenly Mandate Realm cultivators, he seemed to be struggling. He could only barely protect himself. Boy, it seems that I have to do it myself. At this time, the sect master's eyes darkened, and his whole body released a terrible murderous intent. "Come on," Nietian growled, and the corner of his mouth pulled up into a cold arc. Then, a black light shot out from the void, extremely sharp and full of murderous intent. In an instant, the sect master of the Severing Soul sect suddenly felt a terrifying attack. He frowned and immediately moved several meters to the side. Puff! The next moment, a black light whizzed out in front of him, leaving a glaring bloody mark on his face. At the same time, the sword will all over Nietian's body sword, directly breaking through the pressure of the sect master of the Severing Soul sect. Damn it! The sect master of the Severing Soul sect took a few steps back. After stabilizing his body, he let out a beast-like roar. His eyes seemed to be spewing flames, extremely murderous. He did not expect that Nietian could release such a terrible power in an instant. That ray of black light was extremely terrifying. If he had reacted any slower, it would have been enough to take his life. Nietian's figure retreated thousands of meters, his face extremely gloomy. The extreme demon exterminating seal just now had only helped him escape. It had not posed any threat to the soul severing sect master. However, the extreme demon annihilation seal left a bloody mark on the soul severing sect master's face, making him look extremely pathetic. "Little bastard, this sect master will destroy you." Just at that moment, the sect master of the soul severing sect was thoroughly enraged. With a deep roar, his aura burst forth crazily from his entire body. A terrifying power surged out into the void, causing it to explode out endlessly. Nietian's eyebrows furrowed in astonishment. So powerful! The power of a Saint Master of the Heavenly Mandate 9th tier was truly terrifying. It was not something he could contend with at this moment. Kill! At that moment, The sect master of the soul-severing sect roared and slapped out with his palm. The massive palm shadow swept up the dark clouds in all directions like a terrifying storm, sweeping towards Nyetian. Nyetian's expression changed. He felt that the space around him had become heavy, making it impossible for him to evade. Oh no! His eyes suddenly narrowed and he screamed in his heart. At this moment, even if he activated the divine demon body, he would not be able to contend with a cultivator like the soul-severing sect master. Sect master of the soul-severing sect, you are so shameless. At the moment of life and death, a low voice suddenly sounded in the air. Then, a massive palm force broke through the air and descended. Boom! In the next moment, the two palm shadows collided with each other. Terrifying power erupted, rolling and raging, as if it was going to drown the world. Nyetian's figure retreated frantically, avoiding the center of the collision. He steadied himself and let out a long breath. Fortunately, that palm force had come in time. Otherwise, if he had been hit by the soul-severing sect master's palm, even if he did not die, he would have been severely injured. Su Cheng. At that moment, the soul-severing sect master suddenly raised his head and looked at the figure high in the sky, calling out his name. Su Cheng stood tall in the sky like a mountain. His expression was calm, and he did not say anything. "Thank you, Lord Wolf King." Nyetian looked at Su Cheng and bowed slightly to thank him. "Su Cheng, this brat is no longer in Wolf's Night City. Why do you want to interfere?" The soul-severing sect master asked coldly with a sinister expression. "I want to interfere," Su Cheng replied coldly. He was very cold. "Nyetian has already walked out of Wolf's Night City. This has nothing to do with you. Don't force me," the soul-severing sect master said coldly. His eyes were cold. "With me here, you can kill Nyetian." Su Cheng's gaze was firm as he said solemnly. The soul-severing sect master's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was about to drip blood. His entire body released a strong murderous intent. "Su Cheng, you want to interfere even with the matters outside Wolf's Night City? Aren't you being a little too nosy?" At that moment, a low voice sounded. Then, a figure descended, causing the surrounding space to tremble again. "Huang Lang." Su Cheng frowned and his expression changed. The person who had arrived was the leader of the Seven Wolves mercenary group, Huang Lang. "Su Cheng, even if you're the Wolf King of the demonic Moon Wolf group, you can't afford to offend too many people." Then, another low voice sounded. Another figure appeared and landed not far from Huang Lang. It was the leader of the Ghost Wolves mercenary group, Gui Shan. Su Cheng glanced at Gui Shan with an ugly expression. He had not expected the leaders of the two largest mercenary groups in Wolf's Night Mountain to arrive at the same time. It was obvious that they were both here for Nyetian. "Su Cheng, it's better not to interfere with some things," Huang Lang said Su Cheng coldly as he glanced at Gui Shan and locked his gaze on Su Cheng. "This brat killed the disciple of the soul-severing sect master. Isn't it reasonable for the soul-severing sect master to seek revenge on him?" Gui Shan smiled faintly and said in a strange tone. Nyetian looked at Huang Lang and Gui Shan with an extremely gloomy expression. These two leaders were clearly here to kill him. When he challenged the demonic Moon Wolf group, Nyetian defeated the genius warriors of the Seven Wolves and the Ghost Wolves mercenary group, Yin Liujie and Liang Gui. Soon, it was time for the Night Wolf competition. Nyetian's existence was undoubtedly a threat to Yin Liujie and Liang Gui. It was not surprising that Huang Lang and Gui Shan wanted to kill him. Su Cheng's expression was gloomy and he did not speak. "Sect Master, what are you waiting for?" At this moment, Huang Lang looked at the soul-severing sect master and smiled sinisterly. The soul-severing sect master smiled cold. His murderous eyes locked onto Nyetian. With Huang Lang and Gui Shan holding Su Cheng back for him, he could attack Nyetian without fear. "Brat, you're dead." The soul-severing sect master took a step forward. His entire body was filled with murderous intent. A sect master, 2 commanders, and 3 ninth heavenly mandate realm saint masters working together to kill a holy disciple. If this gets out, it won't look good. However, at this moment, a cold and playful voice rang out. It was extremely piercing to the ears of the soul, severing sect master and the others. Hearing this, Nie Tian's expression changed. He was extremely shocked. He was extremely familiar with this voice. It was clearly Lai Yin Jiufeng. He suddenly turned around and saw a figure flying over. It was none other than Lai Yin Jiufeng. Behind Lai Yin Jiufeng were 2 black-clothed people. Their auras were extremely powerful, not any weaker than Su Cheng's. Wolf King. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He immediately recognized the 2 people behind Lai Yin Jiufeng. They were the other 2 wolf kings who had appeared at the wolf slave farm. Chapter 35-57. Prince Lang. Nie Tian looked at Lai Yin Jiufeng and the 2 wolf kings and frowned in confusion. He did not understand why Lai Yin Jiufeng would appear with the 2 wolf kings. At this moment, Lai Yin Jiufeng and the 2 wolf kings arrived and stood not far from Nie Tian's group. 3 heavenly mandate sacred masters working together to kill a holy disciple is not very suitable, is it? Lai Yin Jiufeng glanced at the sect master and smiled playfully. His eyes were actually filled with disdain. Where did this ignorant brat come from? Die. The sect master's expression darkened. He roared and took a step forward. A terrifying aura suddenly erupted and surged towards Lai Yin Jiufeng. You're the one who's looking to die if you dare touch Prince Lang. However, Lai Yin Jiufeng did not panic in the slightest. He simply stood where he was with an indifferent expression. The 2 wolf kings behind him took a step forward at the same time and growled. 2 terrifying auras erupted from them. Bang! In the next moment, the 3 forces collided, and the void rumbled like a clap of thunder. The sect master fought against 2 alone and was hit by the terrifying auras. He retreated several hundred meters and stabilized himself. He exclaimed in surprise and stared at the 2 wolf kings who attacked him. The demonic moon wolf kings were both heavenly mandate 9th level saint masters. They were no weaker than the sect master. It was not strange for the 2 wolf kings to force back the sect master. What confused the sect master was who Lai Yin Jiufeng was. Why would the 2 wolf kings fight for him? Prince Lang. At this time, Nie Tian was also stunned. He looked at Lai Yin Jiufeng in confusion. Why did the 2 wolf kings call Lai Yin Jiufeng Prince Lang? Moreover, the 2 wolf kings were extremely respectful towards Lai Yin Jiufeng. It was clearly the attitude of a servant towards their master. They were 2 wolf kings. They had extremely high statuses in the demonic moon wolf kingdom. Why would they bow to Lai Yin Jiufeng? The next moment, Nie Tian suddenly discovered something. His eyes trembled in shock. He discovered that Lai Yin Jiufeng's strength had reached the 1st level of heavenly charm. How is this possible? Nie Tian's heart sank. He did not dare to believe what he was seeing. Lai Yin Jiufeng had only just arrived in the saint's world. How could he have reached sainthood so quickly? Right now, Lai Yin Jiufeng was radiating an extremely strange aura. It was similar to the heaven-punishing demon Qi, but it wasn't exactly the same. What was going on? Had Lai Yin Jiufeng found the underworld emperor? Lai Yin Jiufeng's transformation shocked Nie Tian greatly. Meanwhile, Huang Lang and Ghost Mountain were staring at Lai Yin Jiufeng in confusion as well. They had no idea who Lai Yin Jiufeng was. They had some understanding of the evil moon heavenly wolf, but they had never heard of him being called a wolf. Even Su Qing had a strange expression on his face. He had no idea where Lai Yin Jiufeng had come from. Who are you, kid? The sect master of the End Soul sect asked coldly while staring at Lai Yin Jiufeng. Lai Yin Jiufeng ignored the sect master and looked at them coldly. Let me give you a piece of advice. It's not too late to leave now, Lai Yin Jiufeng said indifferently. He had an indifferent expression, but his eyes shone with arrogance. He clearly did not take the sect master and the others seriously at all. "Brat, I'm asking you a question. Who are you?" The sect master's expression darkened. He roared angrily. "Are you deaf?" Lien Jiufeng finally looked at the sect master and said coldly, "Did you not hear them call you Prince Lang? Level demonic dragon Lang, are you making fun of me?" The sect master roared angrily with a dark expression. He did not know who Prince Lang was. Lien Jiufeng was clearly making fun of him. "So what if I am making fun of you? Do you dare to kill me?" Lien Jiufeng's lips twitched in disdain. "You're courting death." The sect master roared angrily. Just as he was about to step forward, he saw the two wolf kings take a step forward with a violent aura. He was strong, but he was not strong enough to fight two wolf kings at the same time. "Nye Tian, let's go." Lien Jiufeng ignored the sect master and looked at Nye Tian from afar. He said indifferently, "Amen." Nye Tian nodded. Then, he turned to look in the other direction, where the Bodhi tree seed had already left. Then, Nye Tian moved and arrived beside Lien Jiufeng. He was about to leave. The soul-severing sect master's face was so dark that it looked like it was dripping blood. He looked at Huang Lang and Gui Shan with a dark expression. He could not hold it in any longer and roared, "Captains, are you going to watch this brat leave?" Huang Lang and Gui Shan had ugly expressions. They looked at each other but did not say anything. There was not a great grudge between them and Nye Tian. Nye Tian had only defeated Yin Liujie and Liang Gui. That was all. Nye Tian was a threat to Yin Liujie and Liang Gui if he was alive, but that did not mean that Nye Tian would definitely be able to defeat them during the Night of Wolves. To Huang Lang and Gui Shan, Nye Tian would kill them if he could. If he could not, there was no need to force it. With three wolf kings present, even if Huang Lang, Gui Shan, and the sect master attacked together, they might not be able to gain the upper hand. The Seven Wolves Mercenary Group and Ghost Wolves Mercenary Group were very strong, but they had to be very careful if they wanted to completely fall out with Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf. "Damn it!" The sect master roared angrily when he saw that Huang Lang and Gui Shan did not react. But that was all he could do. It was impossible for him to fight against three wolf kings on his own. If he were to make a move now, he would be courting death. Watching Nye Tian and the others leave, the sect master of the soul-severing sect was filled with hatred. "You are the one who killed my disciple. Stay." However, right at this moment, a low and ruthless voice suddenly resounded in the sky, and then an enormous force descended from the sky. It was actually a powerful and enormous palm that blotted out the heavens and the earth as it pressed down towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian could feel the terrifying pressure above him. His eyes shook and he cried out in shock. "Stop him!" It was at this moment Lien Jiufeng's voice rang out anxiously. Su Cheng and the other two wolf kings reacted and attacked at the same time. Their auras erupted, and three terrifying forces shot into the sky like giant dragons to resist the palm. Boom! In the next instant the giant palm descended, but it was blocked by three forces. The void trembled, and a terrifying force surged out, forming waves in the sky, as if it wanted to drown the surrounding heaven and earth. Bang! 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 But in the next moment, the three streams of energy could not hold on any longer. They crumbled and crashed into the void in all directions. Chapter 35-58. Old Man Inyang. Bang! 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 In the void, three muffled sounds rang out. Su Cheng and the other two drew three bloody trails in the air. Their figures were pushed back thousands of meters before they could stabilize themselves. Boom! In the next moment, the huge palm in the sky suddenly fell towards Nye Tian. Immediately, a rumbling sound filled Nye Tian's ears, and the surrounding space was enveloped by an extremely terrifying murderous aura, sealing it. "Oh no!" Nye Tian frowned. His expression suddenly changed as he cursed inwardly. The giant palm was too terrifying. Su Cheng and the other two were unable to resist it even after working together. Instead, they were heavily injured. The most terrifying thing was that the giant palm didn't seem to weaken even after heavily injuring the three. It continued to fly towards Nie Tian. Damn it! Lien Jiufeng looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes and growled. But at this moment, he couldn't even protect himself, let alone save Nie Tian. Huang Lang, Ghost Mountain, and the Severing Soul Sect's sect master were stunned by the scene before them, their expressions blank. The power contained in that palm made them tremble in fear. They didn't think that there would be such a terrifying expert in the seventh sacred world of cultivators. By the time the sect master of the soul severing sect realized what was happening, his eyes shone with blazing light. He could already see Nie Tian being killed with a single palm strike. Even the three wolf kings working together couldn't block that palm. How could Nie Tian, a third-layer heavenly charm cultivator, resist it? After that palm strike, Nie Tian's fate was certain to be death. Black Tortoise, go! At this moment of life and death, Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed. However, it wasn't fear that shone in his eyes, but a strange light. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly as a boundless power burst forth from within him. Boom! Nie Tian's body trembled. Starlight shone around him as countless star runes appeared. It was as if a river of stars had fallen on his body. In the next instant, the resplendent star runes condensed into the silhouette of a black tortoise and a humongous serpent. It was the black tortoise star soul. Between life and death, Nie Tian had no other choice but to use his forbidden astral soul. Previously, he had already obtained the Slaughterwolf astral soul, Azure Dragon astral soul, Black Tortoise astral soul, and Earthly Extermination astral soul. The Slaughterwolf astral soul was fused by Tang 13, while the Azure Dragon astral soul was fused by the Desolate Ghost Emperor. In addition to that, he still had the Xuanwu astral soul and the Earthly Extermination astral soul. While he was cultivating, he had already prepared his Xuanwu astral soul and Earthly Extermination astral soul, saving them for the most crucial moment. Not only that, based on the astral soul imprints left behind by the Azure Dragon astral soul and the Slaughter Wolf astral soul, he inscribed these two astral souls into the original tome of astral souls. However, after all, the Azure Dragon astral soul and Slaughter Wolf astral soul weren't on the same level as the original Codex of astral souls. Even if Nie Tian were to forcibly inscribe them, the might of their astral souls wouldn't be too great. But the Black Tortoise astral soul and the Earthly Extermination astral soul were different. These two astral souls were above the original tome of astral souls. As long as Nie Tian provided enough astral energy, the power that these two astral souls could unleash was simply unimaginable. What is that? The soul-severing sect leader and the rest couldn't help but exclaim in shock when they saw the black tortoise appearing around Nie Tian. They were very far away from Nie Tian, but they could clearly feel the terrifying power contained within the black tortoise. But how was this possible? Nie Tian was only a third-level heavenly charm cultivator. How could he unleash such a huge amount of power in an instant? Rumble! Bang bang bang! Just as everyone was bewildered, the gigantic palm slammed down, directly onto the black tortoise. A deafening boom rang out, causing the surrounding space to tremble. A terrifying shockwave appeared, extremely terrifying. After that, an even more intense rumbling sound rang out. The gigantic palm and the black tortoise collapsed at the same time, transforming into a violent shockwave that swept through the surrounding space. Nie Tian's silhouette retreated slightly, but he quickly regained his balance. However, even with the protection of the black tortoise, he was still slightly injured. A trace of blood could be seen at the corner of his mouth. But with the black tortoise's powerful defense, he managed to forcefully resist the destructive palm. At this moment, everyone was flabbergasted. They stared blankly at Nie Tian, unable to believe what they had just seen. The power of that gigantic palm was so great that even the 3 wolf kings couldn't resist it. But Nye Tian actually managed to resist it. Was this really not an illusion? How is this possible? At this moment, a sharp voice rang out. It was completely different from the previous voice. Following that, a gray-robed figure appeared high up in the sky. Nye Tian frowned. He couldn't help but frown as he looked at the newcomer. This was a skinny middle-aged man. However, his appearance was very strange. At first glance, he looked like a handsome man, but upon closer inspection, he looked like a woman. His entire body was emitting a feminine aura. Moreover, this person's voice was different both times. The first time was a man's voice, and the second time was a woman's voice. It was very strange. However, his aura was very strong. Just by standing there, it formed a terrifying pressure on the surrounding void. People couldn't help but suspect that the void would collapse if he walked. This person had seriously injured the 3 wolf kings with one palm. There was no doubt that his strength had reached the level of Saint Tianyi. However, at this moment, this person was looking at Nye Tian in disbelief. It was obvious that he was very surprised. How could he not be surprised that a martialist at the 3rd level of heaven rhythm had blocked the palm of Saint Tianyi? Nye Tian stared back at him fearlessly, without the slightest intention of avoiding his gaze. Saint Tianyi. At this moment, the soul-severing sect master's eyes trembled slightly. He immediately thought of something and exclaimed in shock, You are Old Man Yinyang. Old Man Yinyang. Huang Lang and Gui Shan's expressions changed at the same time when they heard this name. The name Old Man Yinyang was too famous in the 7th sacred cultivator world. He was known as the person that no one could provoke. Old Man Yinyang had once destroyed several sects in the 7th sacred cultivator world by himself. Not a single man, woman, old or young was spared. The soul-severing sect master and the others never expected that Old Man Yinyang would actually come to Wolf Night Mountain. Old Man Yinyang. Su Qing and the others stabilized themselves. After hearing this name, their expressions changed and the fear in their hearts was written all over their faces. No wonder the 3 of them couldn't even withstand a single palm from him. However, how did Nye Tian block a palm from Old Man Yinyang? At this moment, they also understood why Old Man Yinyang would come here. During the Heavenly Wolf Challenge, the Yin-Yang double demons challenged Nye Tian together. However, they both died at Nye Tian's hands, and even the evil energy in their bodies was absorbed by Nye Tian. The Yin-Yang double demons were Old Man Yinyang's disciples, so it was not surprising that the latter came to take revenge on Nye Tian. Chapter 35-59. The Wolf Emperor appears. Yin-Yang Evil Yuan. Old Man Yinyang could sense the aura of Evil Yuan from Nye Tian. He never thought that Nye Tian, a mere 3rd-stage heavenly charm holy disciple, could withstand the power of the Yin-Yang Evil Yuan. The Yin-Yang Evil Yuan was absorbed by Nye Tian's demon eye, and the demon eye was stimulated by the Yin-Yang Evil Yuan, awakening the 2 extreme demon annihilation seals. The demon eye had a strong devouring ability, but the Yin-Yang Evil Yuan was very strong, so its aura had not completely disappeared. Old Man Yinyang was very sensitive to Evil Yuan, so he could sense the aura of Evil Yuan on Nye Tian's body. Not only are you looking down on me, but you're also overestimating yourself. Nye Tian smiled and said calmly. Facing an expert like Old Man Yinyang, it was useless even if he was nervous. Moreover, he still had the strength to fight back. The power of the Black Tortoise Star Soul shocked him. If Old Man Yinyang attacked again, he would use the Earth-extinguishing Star Soul. As long as the timing was right, even if the Earth-extinguishing Star Soul couldn't kill Old Man Yinyang, it would be enough to heavily injure him. Brat, you're very good. There aren't many people in the entire sacred world of cultivators who can remain so calm in front of Old Man Yinyang spoke in an eerie voice. This time, it was a shrill female voice, and the feminine aura around his body became even more intense. Because Old Man Yin Yang cultivated the Yin Yang harmony balance, the Yin and Yang energy in his body had fused together, which was why he was in this state. He hadn't expected that a mere holy disciple like Nye Tian would be able to remain so calm in front of him, a mighty saint emperor. Humph. Nye Tian looked at Old Man Yin Yang and couldn't help but sneer. Would you not kill me if I wasn't calm? Brat, you killed the Yin Yang twin demons. As their master, I naturally have to take revenge for them. Old Man Yin Yang coldly smiled. It's just that I never thought that the Yin Yang twin demons would die in the hands of a third-stage heavenly charm cultivator. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched as he said with a cold smile, they died because they were too weak. Kid, you are indeed very strong. Yin Yang elder furrowed his brows and stared at Nye Tian with a strange expression. There's a hidden power in your body that even I feels threatened by. Unfortunately, you're too weak right now. If I goes all out, you still won't have any hope of escaping. Is that so? The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He smiled playfully and asked, then why haven't you made your move? Kid, you can fuse Yin and Yang evil essence. This is something that I didn't expect. Yin Yang old man's eyes trembled slightly as he said, I is willing to give you a chance to live. As long as you are willing to take I as your master, not only will I spare your life, but he will also do his best to guide you and make you a peak powerhouse in the seventh sacred world of cultivators. What do you think? After saying that, Yin Yang old man looked at Nye Tian with a sinister glint in his eyes. He seemed to have a card up his sleeve. When the others heard his words, their expressions couldn't help but stiffen and they were all stunned. Yin Yang old man was originally here to kill Nye Tian, but now he wanted to take Nye Tian as his disciple. What was going on? In the seventh sacred world of cultivators, Yin Yang old man was very famous. Countless martial artists wanted to take him as their master. As long as one became his disciple, they could do whatever they wanted in the seventh sacred world of cultivators. Just like the Yin Yang twin demons from before, even Su Cheng and the others didn't dare to do anything to them. It was just that they were unlucky and met the fearless Nye Tian, who was directly killed. Lai Yin Jiufeng's expression sank at this moment. He was clearly very worried that Nye Tian would agree to Yin Yang old man's request. Nye Tian looked at Yin Yang old man and faintly smiled as he said without hesitation, I'm sorry. I don't want to become a hermaphrodite. Yin Yang old man's eyes trembled. He seemed to suspect that he had misheard and directly exclaimed, What did you say? The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched as he lightly said, You heard it very clearly. I said that you're a hermaphrodite. You're courting death. Yin Yang old man's pupils suddenly shrank. His sharp voice resounded through the void. It was harsh and ear-piercing, like the howl of a wild beast. In the seventh sacred world of cultivators, no one had ever dared to call him a monster. This was his greatest taboo, and he would never allow anyone to call him that. For Nye Tian to say such words to his face, he had touched his reverse scale. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Yin Yang old man's body trembled. Two terrifying auras were frantically released. One was white and the other was black. They were like two giant snakes that coiled around his body, causing the surrounding space to violently tremble. Yin Yang twin extremes, destroy everything! Yin Yang old man roared and said, Brat, you're dead! Boom! As his voice fell, he slapped out with his palm. Yin Yang baleful qi surged out like a violent storm and rushed toward Nye Tian. In an instant, the entire void was filled with an incomparably strong aura of strangulation. It was as if the world was about to be torn apart by this aura. Nye Tian's eyes slightly narrowed. He could feel the aura of death, causing his heart to involuntarily tremble. Earth extinguishing astral soul, out! In an instant, he no longer hesitated. The corner of his mouth twitched as he prepared to release the earth-extinguishing astral soul. The earth-extinguishing astral soul was much stronger than the black tortoise astral soul. Moreover, it possessed a stronger offensive power. Stop! At this moment, a low voice suddenly resounded in the void, following which a majestic force broke through the void and arrived. Nietion frowned. He abruptly raised his head and saw a giant black wolf appearing in the void. It pressed down on the void and rushed straight toward the yin-yang storm. The giant wolf's aura was extremely strong, causing the void to tremble. It was not the slightest bit weaker than the yin-yang storm. Nietion's eyes narrowed. The aura in his body calmed down and he retracted the earth-extinguishing astral soul. The earth-extinguishing astral soul was his final trump card. Unless he had no other choice, he absolutely could not use it. Now that someone was making a move, he could save the earth-extinguishing astral soul. Boom! In the next instant, the two extreme forces collided. The void rumbled as boundless, violent forces crazily exploded, wreaking havoc in the space. Nietion's figure hurriedly retreated, avoiding the direct impact. He only suffered some light injuries. What a powerful force! The eyes of the soul-severing sect leader and the others trembled as they stared at the scene in the sky. Who exactly was this person? He could actually fight head-on against the yin-yang old man and was not at a disadvantage at all. After a moment, the violent waves in the void dissipated. A black-robed figure appeared in the sky, standing there coldly. His eyes were extremely strange, like that of a wolf's, staring at the yin-yang old man from afar. Lord Wolf Emperor! Su Cheng and the others stared at the black-robed figure. They were first stunned before they reacted, and all exclaimed in unison. So it turned out that the black-robed cultivator who suddenly appeared was actually the supreme expert of the demonic Moon Wolf sect, the Wolf Emperor. Wolf Emperor! The soul-severing sect leader and the others were all stunned, their faces filled with shock. Chapter 3560. Battle of the Saints. The Wolf Emperor's appearance shocked everyone, and they were all petrified. Even Su Cheng and the others, the Wolf Kings, rarely saw the Wolf Monarch. Who would have thought that the Wolf Emperor would appear in person? Lord Wolf Monarch of the demonic Moon Heavenly Wolf tribe, you really live up to your reputation. Old Man Yin-yang looked at the Wolf Monarch and said coldly. The Wolf Emperor's eyes narrowed slightly as he said in a cold tone, Yin-yang old man, Wolf's Night Mountain is my, Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf's, territory. I won't allow you to do as you please. I's disciple died in your wolf slave farm. Could it be that I has come to seek revenge on the murderer? Is this considered behaving atrociously? Yin-yang old man's face was gloomy as he growled. Your disciple died on the sky-picking wolf. Since they dared to come down, they should be prepared to die. The Wolf Monarch took a step forward. His figure was like a killer, causing the void to tremble. He said, Nietion was able to kill them because they were too weak. They can't blame anyone else. Old man Yin-yang's face sank again. Lord Wolf Emperor, are you going to protect this kid? He asked cold. Nietion is my, Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf's, honored guest. Whoever dares to touch him is making life difficult for me, Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf. The Wolf Emperor replied in a cold tone. Its aura surged, not giving in at all. His words caused the crowd to be stunned, with confused looks on their faces. The soul-severing sect master, Huang Lang, and Gui Shan wore shocked expressions. They could not react for a long time. Wasn't Nietion challenging the Heavenly Wolf at the Wolf Slave Field? How did he become the Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf's VIP? If that was the case, then why did Nietion choose Sirius? Su Cheng and the others were stunned too. They had no idea what was going on. Lian Jiufeng was the only one who wore a calm smile on his face. Nietion was also stunned at this time, his face full of doubt. He was already very surprised that the Wolf Emperor had appeared in person. Now that he had said something like this, he was undoubtedly even more surprised. The greatest connection between him and the Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf was Su Cheng. However, with Su Cheng's influence, it was not enough for the Wolf Emperor to personally appear, much less make the Wolf Emperor say what he had just said. What in the world happened? What was going on in front of him? Lian Jiufeng. In the next moment, Nie Tian's eyes focused on Lian Jiufeng. His heart shook a little. Lian Jiufeng had been acting very strangely ever since he had appeared. Not only had he broken through to the heavenly charm realm, he had even become Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf's Prince Wolf. Even the Wolf King had to treat him with respect. The Wolf Emperor's appearance was definitely related to Lian Jiufeng. But why was Lian Jiufeng able to become Prince Lang, the Emperor of the Netherworld? Then, Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and he exclaimed inwardly, perhaps it was all because of the Underworld Emperor. Now, he could basically confirm that the people who had captured the Netherworld Emperor in the realm had been Evil Moon Wolf's men. But now, it seemed that this matter might not be so simple. Nie Tian couldn't figure it out right now. He could only ask Lian Jiufeng after he was done with the matter at hand. Wolf Emperor, are you really going to protect this brat? Old Yin Yang looked at the Wolf Emperor with trembling eyes and asked in a cold voice. If you want to kill Nie Tian, you'll have to get past me first. The Wolf Emperor took a step forward, and his aura erupted like a volcano. A giant black wolf appeared around him, its mouth wide open as if it wanted to devour the world. In that case, allow this old man to experience just how powerful the demonic moon Heavenly Wolf's Lord Wolf Emperor is. Old Yin Yang's eyes narrowed slightly as he spoke in a cold voice. His aura was released madly, and the baleful energy of Yin and Yang filled the space for tens of thousands of meters. It was extremely terrifying. If the person who had killed the Yin-Yang twin baleful Yin-Yang was just a normal martial practitioner, then old Yin-Yang could have spared him out of consideration for the Wolf Emperor. But Nie Tian was hiding too many secrets. Old Yin-Yang felt that it was better to take the risk and attack him. He wanted to know why Nie Tian was able to resist his palm strike. Why was Nie Tian able to fuse the Yin and Yang baleful energy? A powerhouse like Great Sage Tianyi is truly terrifying. When the soul-severing sect master and the others saw the aura of old Yin Yang and the Wolf Emperor, their eyes trembled with fear and admiration. The seventh sacred world of cultivators was only an elementary sacred world. Martial practitioners at the 9th level of the Heavenly Mandate realm were already at the level of Overlord. There were only a handful of martial practitioners who could step into the realm of Great Sage Tianyi in the entire 7th sacred world of cultivators. For the soul-severing sect master and the others, being able to see two powerhouses like Great Sage Tianyi fighting was absolutely beneficial. Kill! At this moment, old Yin Yang's sharp and ear-piercing voice rang out. The Yin and Yang baleful energy whistled out and filled the sky as it rushed toward the Wolf Emperor. Roar! The Wolf Emperor was not afraid at all. His aura surged and a giant black wolf appeared, rushing toward the Yin and Yang baleful energy. Boom! Chi-chi-chi! Terrifying forces collided in the void, causing the world to shake and the sky to change color. The violent impact seemed to want to devour the world. Everyone looked up at the sky with trembling eyes. At this moment, they could only see the violent impact. They could no longer see the figures of old Yin Yang and the Wolf Emperor. However, the fluctuations of power coming from the sky made everyone feel how fierce and terrifying the battle was. Great Sage Tianyi was not someone the Heavenly Mandate Saint Master could compare to. In this kind of battle, it would be difficult for the soul-severing sect master and the others to even get close. Bang bang bang! At this moment, there was a sudden dull sound in the sky. Waves of power rushed out like demons from hell, violently whistling and rushing toward everything. At this moment, the figures of old Yin Yang and the Wolf Emperor appeared in the sky. Both of them were in a very sorry state. Their bodies were covered in blood, and their expressions were very ugly. The two of them were close in strength and had similar combat strength. They were evenly matched opponents. Wolf Emperor, you forced I to do this. At this moment, old Yin Yang's eyes trembled. A terrifying aura was released from his body, and his face was extremely gloomy and cold. Boom! In the next moment, a terrifying aura surged out from his body. It was extremely sinister, and the yin-yang evil qi in his body suddenly became violent. It was several times more violent than before. Huh! When the Wolf Emperor saw this, he could not help but frown, and his expression changed. However, in the next moment, his eyes darkened, and a terrifying aura surged out from his body. Suddenly, his aura skyrocketed. Heavenly Wolf Curse Mark. When Su Cheng and the others saw this scene, their expressions suddenly changed, and they cried out in horror. In order to fight against old Yin Yang, the Wolf Emperor had even activated the Serious Curse Seal. Nie Tian's eyes also narrowed. He could feel that the Wolf Emperor's body was releasing a terrifying curse aura. It was somewhat similar to Wenren II's Forest Wolf Curse Seal, but stronger. One move, life and death. Old Yin Yang also felt the terrifying aura from the Wolf Emperor, but he was not afraid at all. His eyes surged with a cold light, and he spoke word by word. Since both of them had revealed their strongest trump cards, the next move would be a moment of life and death. Old Yin Yang and the Wolf Emperor did not expect things to turn out this way. Chapter 3561. Boom, boom, boom. High up in the sky, Yin Yang Old Man and the Wolf Emperor released their auras like two volcanoes erupting, causing the surrounding space to tremble. Terrifying power surged violently, causing the world to tremble. The void seemed like it would collapse in the next moment. These two people are so strong. The soul-severing sect master and the others felt the strong fluctuations coming from the space, and could not help but tremble in shock. They were all Heavenly Mandate 9th level Saint Masters, but the fluctuations in the air made them feel a great threat. At this moment, everyone's eyes trembled as they stared at the two people high up in the sky, not wanting to miss a single scene. The next move would determine the victor between Yin Yang Old Man and the Wolf Emperor. It was hard to imagine how tragic it would be. Zhou Lianshan, stop! However, at this moment, a clear voice suddenly rang out in the void, causing everyone's eyes to narrow as they looked over. High up in the sky, a figure in blue stood there like an icy blue cloud, graceful like a fairy. It's her! Nie Tian could not help but tremble when he saw the figure in blue, and his heart was filled with surprise. The person who appeared at this time was none other than the mysterious woman Nie Tian met when he challenged the Heavenly Wolf, Lan Zhuing. Back then, Lan Zhuing had fought with Nie Tian and said that if Nie Tian could take 3 of her sword strikes, she would lose. She had underestimated Nie Tian and let Nie Tian win the battle. At that time, Nie Tian felt that Lan Zhuing's identity might not be simple and that there might be a great force behind her. He did not expect Lan Zhuing to appear at this time. Yin Yang Old Man was stunned and his body froze. He raised his head to look at Lan Zhuing and asked in a deep voice, "Little girl, who are you? How do you know I's name?" Zhou Lianshan was Yin Yang Old Man's name. However, in the entire sacred world of cultivators, only Yin Yang Old Man knew about it, not Zhou Lianshan. In the entire sacred world of cultivators, there were no more than 3 people who knew the name Zhou Lianshan. Who was this girl in blue? How did she know about Zhou Lianshan? Hua! Lan Zhuing looked at Zhou Lianshan from afar. She did not speak, but extended her palm. A ray of light surged out from her palm, and in the blink of an eye, it transformed into a 7-colored lotus. The light surged, and it was extremely breathtaking. What a beautiful lotus! The gazes of everyone couldn't help but tremble when they saw this scene, and they exclaimed endlessly in admiration. Blissful colors! Zhou Lianshan looked at the 7-colored lotus, and his eyes narrowed as if he had seen something extremely terrifying. He exclaimed in shock, "You are..." He suddenly paused, not because he was too shocked to speak, but because he was too frightened to speak. It seemed that Lan Zhuing's status was very high, which made the Yin Yang Old Man afraid. "Zhou Lianshan, this battle ends here. Come with me. Lan Zhuying nodded slightly. She shook her hand and the 7-colored lotus disappeared. She then said indifferently. Her voice was very gentle, but it contained a power that could not be disobeyed. Yes. Zhou Lianshan's eyes flickered. Without any hesitation, he nodded and retracted his aura. He looked at Lan Zhuying respectfully. After that, his figure flashed and arrived by Lan Zhuying's side. However, he didn't dare to get too close, and he had an expression of fear and trepidation on his face. Nie Tian, I'll see you at the Wolf Night contest. Lan Zhuying suddenly turned to look at Nie Tian and said with a smile. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he nodded slightly. It seemed that Lan Zhuying was very interested in him after losing to him. Then, Lan Zhuying and the Yinyang old man did not stop. They turned into 2 rays of light and disappeared into the sky. The crowd looked at the place where the 2 of them disappeared, and they were stunned. They could not react for a long time. Who was Lan Zhuying? Why was the Yinyang old man so obedient to her? The Yinyang old man's attitude was completely that of a servant, not daring to disobey his master. The Yinyang old man was a peak existence in the 7th sacred world of cultivators, a violent person who killed without batting an eye. Why was he so respectful to a girl? After a while, the crowd calmed down and couldn't help but discuss. I heard that the Yinyang old man is a cultivator from the sky of high paradise. He was so respectful to that girl in blue. Could she be someone from the sky of high paradise? It's very likely. The girl in blue released a 7-colored lotus, and the Yinyang old man said something about the 7 colors of high paradise. It seems to be a symbol of the sky of high paradise. To be able to make the Yinyang old man so obedient, the status of that girl in blue is not low. As the crowd discussed, their expressions slowly changed, and they were all shocked. After all, the 7th sacred world of cultivators was only a primary sacred world, so it had a natural reverence for cultivators from a higher sacred world. The sky of high paradise. Nie Tian listened to the discussion of the crowd and could not help but frown. He faintly smiled and secretly remembered this name. Lan Zhuying should also appear in the upcoming Wolf Night struggle. This would make it much more interesting. The Wolf Emperor's expression was much more relaxed at this time. Fortunately, Lan Zhuying had arrived in time to stop the battle. Otherwise, he and the Yinyang old man would definitely be dead and the other injured. The Yinyang old man's strength was on par with his, so the most likely outcome of a battle between the 2 of them would be death. Even if one of them survived, they would definitely be seriously injured. He did not come here to kill the Yinyang old man, but to stop the latter from killing Nie Tian. The end of this battle was the best outcome. At this time, Lien Zhufeng came to Nie Tian's side and said with a faint smile, Nie Tian, you should have a lot of questions to ask me. Come with me. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He had too many questions in his heart. Lien Zhufeng bid farewell to the Wolf Emperor and left with Nie Tian. In next to no time, both of them arrived at a remote place outside Wolf's Night City. Nie Tian, feel free to ask whatever you want to know, Lien Zhufeng said with a playful smile. Your Highness, tell me how you got your identity first. Nie Tian looked at Lien Zhufeng and asked directly. Lord Hell Monarch gave it to me. Lien Zhufeng nodded and replied with a smile. Hell Monarch. Nie Tian's eyes focused and he said in surprise, You found him. Earlier, Nie Tian had guessed that Lien Zhufeng had found the Hell Monarch, and that his identity as the Son of Wolf was related to the Hell Monarch. However, he was still surprised when he confirmed this with Lien Zhufeng. The Hell Monarch is doing very well. Lien Zhufeng smiled and looked at Nie Tian. He said, You have a wisp of heaven-punishing devil energy on you. It was left behind by the Hell Monarch. Nie Tian's expression froze when he heard Lien Zhufeng's words. He exclaimed in surprise. He had obtained the heaven-punishing devil energy in the valley. It was extremely powerful and had almost devoured him. Chapter 3562. Fated enemy Nye Tian, the Emperor of the Underworld's identity is not as simple as you think. Lien Jiufeng smiled faintly when he saw Nye Tian's surprise and guessed what he was thinking. What do you mean? Nye Tian frowned and asked gravely. Did the Emperor of the Underworld have a deeper identity than the Emperor of the ancient Ming race? It seemed that Nye Tian had guessed correctly. The Emperor of the Underworld had not been captured by evil Moon Wolf's people. The Emperor of the Underworld will tell you himself. Lien Jiufeng smiled faintly and said, however, whether you can meet the Emperor of the Underworld will depend on your own ability. Where is the Emperor of the Underworld right now? Nye Tian asked in a cold voice with a dark expression. The Emperor of the Underworld is at Wolf Knight Mountain. If you want to meet him, you must become the champion of the Wolf Knight contest. Lien Jiufeng looked at Nye Tian and said indifferently. The Emperor of the Underworld wants to meet me by becoming the champion of the Wolf Knight contest? Nye Tian frowned. His expression was very ugly. He had come to save the Emperor of the Underworld, but he hadn't expected it to be so difficult to meet him. Lien Jiufeng nodded and said, when you meet the Emperor of the Underworld, he will explain everything to you. The Emperor of the Underworld did not think that you would obtain the Heart of the Sky. The Emperor of the Underworld knows about the Heart of the Sky? Nye Tian asked in astonishment. Of course the Emperor of the Underworld will sense it when the two hearts resonate. Lien Jiufeng smiled faintly and said indifferently. Nye Tian frowned and fell silent for a long time. When the Heart of the Sky and the Bodhi Heart resonated, he felt that it was because the Heart of the Sky and the Heaven-Punishing Demon Heart resonated that he was able to absorb the Heaven-Punishing Demon Heart back in the valley. It seemed that the Heart of the Sky, the Heaven-Punishing Demon Heart, and the Bodhi Heart were connected. However, Nye Tian still did not know what kind of power three-hearted hearts possessed. Nye Tian, the Night of Wolves contest will begin in 3 days. I hope you won't disappoint the Emperor of the Underworld. Lien Jiufeng looked at Nye Tian and suddenly smiled strangely. He said, the Emperor of the Underworld said that you and him are fated enemies since you have the Heart of the Sky. The two of you are destined to have a battle of destiny. Fated enemy? Nye Tian couldn't help but narrow his eyes when he heard Lien Jiufeng's words. The corner of his lips twitched, and a look of disdain appeared on his face. He hated the word fate. In his opinion, there was no such thing as fate. There was only the bewitchment of the human heart. No one was destined to be anyone's enemy or friend. Acknowledging fate was itself a form of submission. If he couldn't control his own destiny, then what was the point of walking on the road? See you in 3 days, Nye Tian. Lien Jiufeng looked strangely at Nye Tian, smiled faintly, and left. Nye Tian nodded and watched Lien Jiufeng leave. Since he was already at Wolf's Night Mountain, there was no harm in participating in the Night of Wolves contest. He really wanted to know what had happened to the Emperor of the Underworld. After that, Nye Tian had Wenren Xiang come out and give her the Night Wolf Sacred Flame. The Night Wolf Sacred Flame that the Bodhi Seed had given him had absorbed a large amount of Bodhi Heart's power. It could completely suppress the Forest Wolf curse mark. If Wenren too consumed the Night Wolf Sacred Flame, the cold curse mark would no longer be able to suppress him. Instead, it would be under his control and become his power. After Wenren Xiang received the Night Wolf Sacred Flame, Nye Tian let her leave. Nye Tian had a vague feeling that the Night of Wolves contest this time might not be as simple as it seemed. Wenren Xiang had no intention of participating in the Night of Wolves contest in the first place, so she left directly. Following that, Nye Tian returned to Wolf's Night City and found an inn to stay in for the time being. 3 days later, the Night of Wolves contest officially began. At this time, the largest plaza of Wolf's Night City was bustling with noise and a sea of people. So many people. Nye Tian's figure appeared outside the plaza. Looking at the hundreds of thousands of martial practitioners in front of him, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He didn't expect that there would be so many people participating in a small Night of Wolves contest. At the center of the plaza, there were hundreds of giant wolf statues. Each of them was tens of thousands of meters tall and looked very grand. They were protected by powerful formations, giving off a very intimidating feeling. Is the Night of Wolves contest going to be held on those giant wolf statues? Nie Tian looked at the giant wolf statues on the plaza and couldn't help but frown. He was puzzled. Nie Tian. Just when he was puzzled, a familiar voice rang out. He turned around and saw that it was Su Kuanga. That's the Celestial Wolf Arena. There's a total of 256 of them. Su Kuanga seemed to see through the doubts in Nie Tian's heart. He pointed to the giant wolf statues on the plaza and said, "The Night of Wolves contest will be held on the Celestial Wolf Arena. 256 Celestial Wolf Arena. There are hundreds of thousands of martial artists here. I'm afraid it's not enough, right?" Nie Tian frowned, shook his head and said with a smile. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was unknown how long it would take for hundreds of thousands of martial artists to fight. The primary battle is not a one-on-one battle. Su Kuanga laughed and said, "The primary battle is for everyone to enter the Celestial Wolf Arena together. It's a big chaotic battle. After a day, the martial artists who are able to stand on the Celestial Wolf Arena will be considered to have advanced. Moreover, there can only be one martial artist on the Celestial Wolf Arena. So that's how it is." When Nie Tian heard Su Kuanga's words, he couldn't help but be surprised. The primary battle for the Night of Wolves contest was really very cruel. There were hundreds of thousands of participants, but only 200 people could advance. The elimination rate was really a bit high. "Don't worry, there will definitely be a place for you and me in the Celestial Wolf Arena." Su Kuanga looked at Nie Tian and said with a laugh. Nie Tian nodded and smiled, but didn't say anything. He participated in the Night of Wolves contest for hegemony because he wanted to be the champion. If he couldn't even pass the primary battle, it would be too ridiculous. At this time, all the martial artists looked at the sky with burning eyes, waiting for the evil moon heavenly wolf's people to appear. A moment later, a black figure appeared in the sky. His aura was as powerful as a mountain, and the pressure on the void was very great. "Wolf Emperor!" Nie Tian looked at that person, his eyes slightly trembled, and he cried out in his heart. He didn't expect that on the first day of the Night of Wolves contest, the Wolf Emperor would appear. The appearance of the Wolf Emperor caused everyone's expression to change, and they couldn't help but discuss in a low voice. "Who is this person? How can his aura be so strong? This person's aura seems to be even more terrifying than the Wolf King. Could it be Lord Wolf Emperor? I heard that in this Night of Wolves contest, Lord Wolf Emperor will personally appear. He must be the Wolf Emperor." The crowd discussed and looked at the Wolf Emperor with even more reverence. Chapter 3563. Chapter 3558. Chapter 3558. The primary battle. Everyone looked at the Wolf Emperor with awe and anticipation in their eyes. "I am the Wolf Emperor of the Evil Moon's Celestial Wolf Emperor. Thank you for coming to participate in the Wolf Night battle," the Wolf Emperor said in a deep voice. Although his voice was not loud, each word carried great weight. "It really is the Wolf Emperor. No wonder he is so strong." Very few people had seen the Wolf Emperor before. At this time, their eyes trembled violently and they were shocked. The Wolf Emperor smiled faintly and said some polite words. Then, another person stepped onto the stage. It was a Wolf King expert. The Wolf King briefly introduced the rules of the Wolf Night battle and then loudly announced, "The Wolf Night battle of the Wolf Night battle begins." At the moment when his voice fell, hundreds of thousands of warriors in the entire square moved. Their wild auras were like endless waves, rolling out and shrouding the Celestial Wolf Arena. Boom! Dozens of warriors rushed forward and their auras exploded like a landslide. Even though the Celestial Wolf Arena was protected by a powerful formation, it could not help but shake. It seems that the competition in the primary selection is even more intense than I had imagined. Seeing this scene, Nye Tian couldn't help but frown as he said with a bitter smile. There are only 256 celestial wolf arenas here. This determines that among the hundreds of thousands of warriors here, only 256 will be able to advance. I am afraid that in order to advance, all the warriors will go all out. Su Kuanga stood beside Nye Tian and said with a wry smile, "The competition between warriors has always been the most cruel. The survival of the fittest. The strong are respected. Those without strength are destined to be trampled under the feet of others and become a stepping stone for others' glory." However, everyone had a competitive heart. This was especially evident in martialists, and it was especially vivid and incisive. Without a competitive heart, a warrior is destined to not go far. For the sake of being strong, they will not hesitate to risk their lives. At this moment, the entire plaza was in chaos. Hundreds of thousands of cultivators were fighting each other. It was a chaotic battle. Nye Tian saw from afar that many of the weaker warriors were directly killed by the stronger warriors, while the stronger warriors were killed by even stronger warriors. The entire square was incomparably tragic. The smell of blood shrouded the heavens and earth. It was a ghastly sight. High up in the sky, the Wolf Emperor and the others watched all of this with indifferent expressions. "Nye Tian, let's make our move." At this time, Su Kuanga looked at Nye Tian and said with a faint smile, Nye Tian nodded and prepared to make his move. In truth, he could have chosen to act a little later, but he could tell that those martial artists who had stepped onto the serious arena first had a significant geographical advantage. In any case, he would have to make a move sooner or later, so he might as well make a move earlier to temper his strength. Nye Tian and Su Kuanga's figures moved at the same time, but they headed towards different serious arena. During the preliminaries, no one wanted to encounter a powerhouse, so the powerful warriors would take the initiative to avoid them. Nye Tian took a step forward and his whole body surged with sword intent. Like a giant sword, he slashed towards the crowd. Wherever his figure passed, a bloody path was forcibly created, and countless warriors were directly blasted away. With his strength, he could have directly killed these warriors, but he did not do so. It was just a power struggle, there was no need to kill. "That guy is so strong." When the crowd saw how tyrannical Nye Tian was, they could not help but be shocked. At this time, Nye Tian's figure had already soared into the sky, heading towards the highest point of the serious arena. "This is my serious arena, get lost." However, right at this moment, a deep and domineering voice rang out. Then, a fat martial artist appeared and furiously slammed his palm towards Nye Tian. "Ninth layer of heavenly rhythm." Nye Tian frowned slightly. He immediately felt a terrifying pressure descend, and the surrounding void was about to be sealed. Although this warrior looked ordinary, he had the strength of the ninth layer of heavenly rhythm, and his attack was very ruthless, directly killing Nye Tian with his palm. Nye Tian just saw that dozens of warriors had died at the hands of the fat warrior. Boom! At this moment, Nye Tian unleashed a terrifying sword aura and charged forward like a raging dragon, shattering the palm in midair. Bang! Immediately after, a muffled sound, the fat warrior was directly sent flying, seriously injured. Nye Tian could have killed him directly, but he still showed mercy. So strong! When the people below saw how fierce Nye Tian was, they could not help but tremble in fear. At this time, no one dared to approach Nye Tian, they could only watch helplessly as he stepped onto the serious arena step by step. In the blink of an eye, Nye Tian stepped onto the serious arena. His whole body surged with sword intent, like a peerless sword, standing between heaven and earth. Su Kuanga is really powerful. At this time, Nye Tian looked at the other serious arena. Su Kuanga's figure was already standing at the highest point. The two of them attacked together. Almost at the same time, they stepped onto the serious arena. At this time, Nye Tian could not help but look forward to the battle with Su Kuanga. Next, several experts rushed up and tried to challenge Nye Tian, but they were all easily defeated by him. After half a day, the number of warriors on the square became fewer and fewer. The whole square was filled with rivers of blood and mountains of corpses. Nye Tian stood steadily on the serious arena. Below him stood dozens of warriors, eager to challenge him, but after he released his sword power, those people immediately retreated in fear. And at this time, the other celestial wolf arenas were basically settled. The powerful warriors firmly occupied their own celestial wolf arenas. Those warriors that attempted to challenge them were all very cautious, waiting for the final opportunity. "All of you, get out of my way!" At this time, a stern voice suddenly sounded, followed by a murderous aura, instantly filling the entire square. When Nye Tian heard this voice, he felt a familiar aura, causing him to be surprised. His expression changed. "Ah!" In the next moment, a series of screams sounded. A figure like a sharp blade rushed straight to the serious arena. Everywhere he passed, there were miserable screams. It was incomparably bloody. Who is this person? How can he be so savage? The eyes of the crowd trembled. Looking at the terrifying figure, their expressions changed. 7 kills, it really is you. Nye Tian frowned and spun around. His eyes locked onto the figure, and he was shocked inwardly. When that voice sounded, he felt an incomparably strong murderous aura. At this time, the figure he saw was indeed the heaven-punishing demon heart's killing body. 7 kills. Nye Tian did not expect that 7 kills would also participate in the Wolf Knight struggle. Chapter 3564. The first batch of Arena Lords, 9th layer of Heavenly Charm. Nye Tian stared at Qi Sha from afar. His eyes trembled in shock. He could not believe his eyes. Qi Sha was actually at the 9th layer of Heavenly Charm right now. No wonder Qi Sha's presence was so powerful. He was invincible wherever he went. But how was this possible? Qi Sha and Lai Yanjiufeng had both come to the Saints' World with Nye Tian, and they had not even reached sainthood when they first entered the Saints' World. Nye Tian could understand why Lai Yanjiufeng was at the 1st layer of Heavenly Charm. But how did Qi Sha reach the 9th layer of Heavenly Charm in such a short amount of time? Just what had happened to Qi Sha? Die. Just as Nye Tian was feeling confused, Qi Sha roared. Like a beast that had just broken out of its cage, he took a step forward and slammed his palm down, instantly killing the cultivator on the celestial wolf arena. Upon seeing this scene, the crowd could not help but gasp in unison. The shock in their hearts was written on their faces. Just who was Qi Sha? How could he be so cruel and vicious? At this moment, the other experts on the Celestial Wolf Arena all looked at Qi Sha with different expressions. Yin Liujie, Liang Gui, Su Kuanga, and the others all stared at Qi Sha in shock. They had never known that there was such a terrifying genius cultivator on Wolf's Night Mountain. Even the blind sword Bodhisattva's eyes were trembling slightly at this moment. He could sense an intense threat coming from Qi Sha. He had a vague feeling that Qi Sha would be one of his strongest opponents in the Wolf Knight contest. But in the next moment, the Bodhi Z recovered his composure. The corner of his lips twitched as he murmured, "To think that there would be 2 people that interest me in this Wolf Knight contest. Now that's interesting." The 2 people he spoke of were Nye Tian and Qi Sha. Nye Tian, long time no see. At this time, 7 kills, who was standing firmly on the serious arena, suddenly turned around and fixed his murderous eyes on Nye Tian as he said in a loud voice. This action of his could not help but startle everyone present. So this kid is Nye Tian. Everyone's gaze shifted to Nye Tian, and they were all surprised. After the sky-picking wolf incident, Nye Tian's name had already spread to everyone's ears. However, not many people had actually seen him. What surprised everyone even more was that this ferocious warrior, who had just appeared, actually knew Nie Tian. "Long time no see." Nie Tian responded with a faint smile. He could sense the murderous intent in Seven Kill's eyes, but at the same time, he also felt a trace of fear. This made him very confused. In the past, Chi Sha had lost to him, but Chi Sha had never shown any fear. Seven Kills had the extreme kill demon eye, and his entire body was filled with murderous intent. He was the kind of person who wasn't afraid of anything. Why would he show fear in front of Nie Tian now? "I'm looking forward to a battle with you." Seven Kills looked at Nie Tian from afar and said straightforwardly. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and did not say anything else. At this time, the other geniuses did not look too good. Seven Kills ignored them, which meant that he did not take them seriously at all. In other words, they were not qualified to be Seven Kills' opponent. There was only one person who was truly qualified to be Seven Kills' opponent, and that was Nie Tian. Interesting. The corners of Bodhiseed's mouth twitched slightly as he watched this scene. Up until now, the only people who had caught his attention were Nie Tian and Seven Kills. He was very happy to see a massacre between Nie Tian and Seven Kills. Following that, the preliminary battle ended. 256 martialists advanced, while the other martialists were all eliminated. And in the preliminary battle, hundreds of thousands of martialists died tragically. Although the other martialists survived, they had no fate to participate in the following battles and could only be spectators. Following that, all the martialists rested where they were. 3 days later, the Wolf Knight struggle continued. Following that, the battle between 256 martialists was known as the Battle of the Green Wolf. Wolf Knight Mountain had a near-fanatical worship of wolves. Most factions were related to wolves, and young martialists with formidable strength and talent were known as Green Wolves. The champion of the Wolf Knight struggle was also known as the Green Wolf Lord. But the Wolf Knight struggle this time was different from the past. The Wolf Emperor would personally select 9 Green Wolf Lords, but the champion of the struggle was still only one. The rules of the Green Wolf battle were very simple. All 256 martialists were divided into 2 groups, the Arena Lords and the Challengers. The so-called Arena Defenders were the 18 martialists selected by Evil Moon Skywolf to stand on the Skywolf Arena and become the first batch of Arena Lords. Then, the other martialists were the Challengers and could issue challenges to the 18 Arena Lords. If the Challengers won, the Arena Lord would step down, and the Challengers would become the new Arena Lord. Every Challenger had 4 chances to issue a challenge. If they failed all 4 times, they would be eliminated. After the Arena Lord was eliminated, they still had 4 chances to issue challenges and could go to other arenas. This continued until there were only 18 Arena Lords left on the field. After the Battle of the Green Wolves, only the final 18 Arena Lords could advance. The other martialists were all eliminated. Furthermore, during the Battle of the Green Wolves, a martialist could obtain 1 point for each victory, which would be used as the basis for the next battle's overall strength ranking. At this time, Evil Moon Skywolf's people announced the rules of the Battle of the Green Wolves and directly announced the first batch of 18 Arena Lords. Nie Tian was among the first batch of Arena Lords. The 18 Arena Lords announced by Evil Moon Skywolf were all rather strong. Most of them were 9th-level Heavenly Charm Holy Disciples, and there were even former Heavenly Mandate Sacred Masters. However, there were 2 exceptions. 3rd-level Heavenly Charm Nie Tian and 5th-level Heavenly Charm Bodhisattva. Then, the 18 Arena Lords stepped onto the Celestial Wolf Arena, ready to accept other martialists' challenges. Nie Tian took a step forward and stood firmly on the arena. Nie Tian, I challenge you. A voice rang out the moment his figure landed on the arena. Then, a martialist leaped into the air and stepped onto the arena. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the martialist and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He originally thought that with his fame, very few would challenge him. He didn't expect that someone would challenge him before he even stood still. I don't believe that a third-level heavenly charm cultivator is as strong as the rumors say, the martialist said coldly as he looked at Nye Tian with killing intent in his eyes. This was someone who didn't believe that Nye Tian, who was only at the third level of heavenly charm, was so strong. Make your move. Nye Tian looked at his opponent and said with a faint smile. This person had some strength. He was already at the 8th level of heavenly charm, but this kind of strength was nothing in Nye Tian's eyes. Die! The martialist's eyes darkened as he roared. He took out a black demonic blade and slashed horizontally. A terrifying murderous aura burst out and charged towards Nye Tian. Boom! Nye Tian stood where he was, unmoving like a mountain. Only when the saber's shadow was about to descend did his body tremble and release a terrifying sword intent, directly shattering the saber's shadow and pressing down on the bladesman. I admit defeat. The martialist was shocked by the scene in front of him. Then, he felt a terrifying force pressing down on him. He was so scared that his face turned pale and he shouted. Chapter 3565. Translated by Zephizi, edited by Elrianth. Nye Tianling stood on the stage, having won his first battle with ease. Nye Tian is too terrifying. He's facing an 8th level heavenly rhythm cultivator so easily. It looks like he can easily defend the stage. The crowd exclaimed as they looked at Nye Tian. That cultivator was an 8th level heavenly rhythm cultivator, but he couldn't fight back against Nye Tian at all. This was enough to show how strong Nye Tian was. Following that, a few more people challenged Nye Tian, but they were all defeated by Nye Tian. Evil Moon Tianlang was the host of the Azure Wolf battle, and he had already seen the performances of the cultivators present. The stronger cultivators had already been chosen as the ringmasters. Therefore, those who could pose a threat to Nye Tian were all on the stage. After a few defeats, the other cultivators were wary of Nye Tian and didn't dare to challenge him again. Nye Tian would occasionally pay attention to the battles on the other stages. The other ringmasters weren't Nye Tian's opponents right now, but there was a chance that they could be his opponents in the upcoming battles. Knowing their strength in advance was very helpful for him in the upcoming battles. Half a day passed in the blink of an eye. More than half of the 256 cultivators present had been eliminated, and a few dozen of them had been killed. The 18 ringmasters weren't like Nye Tian, who only cared about winning and losing. Some of the ringmasters were extremely cruel, and they didn't show any mercy when facing challengers. Although this method was cruel, it didn't violate the rules. Furthermore, it could intimidate the challengers so that others wouldn't dare to challenge them again. Nye Tian observed the battles on the other stages and had a basic understanding of their strength. Up until now, there were only 2 people who could make him feel pressured, the Bodhi Seed and Lan Zhuiying. Even though he had fought the 2 of them before, neither of them had used their full strength. Therefore, he didn't know how powerful their battle prowess was. Another half a day passed, and the Battle of the Azure Wolves was nearing its end. Only a few cultivators still had the qualifications to challenge. The 18 arena lords stood on the arena from beginning to end, and not a single one of them succeeded in challenging the arena. Nye Tian's expression was indifferent. There were only a few challengers left, and he was very relaxed now. He just had to wait for the Green Wolf battle to end. However, just at this moment, he suddenly noticed a cultivator in green. His expression could not help but change, and his eyes darkened slightly. That azure-clothed cultivator stood there quietly, motionless like a bell. There was no expression on his face, just like a block of ice. However, there was a strange sword intent surging around his body. It was like flowing water, endless and endless. It was precisely this sword intent that attracted Nye Tian's attention. He had never seen such a pure sword intent, which made him admire it very much. Nye Tian. At this moment, the azure-clothed swordsman suddenly raised his head, and his sharp eyes locked onto Nye Tian's figure, as he called out Nie Tian's name in a deep voice. Nie Tian couldn't help but narrow his eyes. The corners of his mouth twitched as he said with a smile, "Do you want to challenge me? I am here for you." The azure-clothed swordsman's eyes shone brightly as he said in a deep voice, "Is that so?" Nie Tian frowned and then smiled. He felt that the azure-clothed swordsman must have heard about his challenge against the heavenly wolves, and thus came here to have a battle with him. The azure-clothed swordsman's figure moved, and he directly stepped onto the arena. He stood firmly, and his figure was extremely sharp, like a sharp sword. "Very well." Nie Tian's gaze sharpened slightly, and he smiled calmly. He did not sense any murderous intent from the azure-clothed swordsman, but only a strong desire to battle. The azure-clothed swordsman was not fighting to kill, but to battle. "My name is Ing Sangqiong." At that moment, the azure-clothed swordsman said coldly. At the same time, a powerful sword intent whistled out, and the sword aura soared into the sky violently. Ninth layer sword aura. Nie Tian's gaze sharpened slightly, and he could not help but exclaim. He did not realize that Ing Sangqiong was a swordsman with ninth layer sword aura. Ing Sangqiong seemed to have purposely concealed his sword intent, and hid his strength. Such a powerful sword intent! At that moment the eyes of the crowd quivered, and they could not help but exclaim. The sword intent around Ing Sangqiong was like a raging wave, rolling endlessly. It was extremely terrifying. "Make your move." Nie Tian's eyes flickered with the light of blazing excitement as sword intent surged out of his body. Like starlight, it swirled ceaselessly and morphed into a terrifying sword aura. At first glance, Nie Tian looked like a bottomless abyss of sword intent. Ing Sangqiong was a good opponent, and he was worth fighting with all his might. "Nie Tian, in this battle, you and I will only compete with sword intent." At that moment, Ing Sangqiong's eyes flashed with a strange light, and he said in a deep voice, "All right." Nie Tian was stunned, and he was a little surprised. Then, he nodded and smiled. He was curious as to why Ing Sangqiong only competed with him in sword intent. 3 strikes to decide the winner. Ing Sangqiong said in a deep voice, and a black ancient sword appeared in his hand. It looked simple and unadorned, but it contained a sharp aura, as if it was a beast in deep sleep. "Nie Tian, this is my sword of primordial spirit, and it's called the Qian Wu Sinking Abyss." Ing Sangqiong said loudly, and the Qian Wu Sinking Abyss in his hand let out a deep sword hum. It sounded like an ancient bell, and it was deafening. Very well. Nie Tian felt the fluctuation of sword intent in the Qian Wu Sinking Abyss. His lips twitched, and his eyes were filled with excitement. The sword in the sky appeared, and he said, "My sword, sky." The sword in the sky. Ing Sangqiong's eyes quivered when he saw the sword in the sky in Nie Tian's hand. His expression turned extremely passionate. Nie Tian's eyes froze when he saw this. It seemed that Ing Sangqiong knew about the sword in the sky. The first strike. At that moment, Ing Sangqiong let out a deep roar, and the Qian Wu Sinking Abyss swept across the sky. Instantly, a powerful sword intent was unleashed, and it covered the sky and earth. It was as if a giant hand was about to engulf Nie Tian from all directions. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He could feel that his entire body had been sealed, and the space around him had become much heavier. Ing Sangqiong was able to unleash the power of his sword intent to such a terrifying extent without using any sword technique. It was evident that he was very knowledgeable in swordsmanship. Break. In the next second, the sword in Nie Tian's hand trembled slightly, and a sharp sword intent was unleashed like a snake, as if it was going to tear everything apart. Boom! Bang! Following this, the 2 sword intents collided with each other, causing the air to tremble. Following this, the powerful sword intent was shattered into pieces. Ing Sangqiong's body trembled slightly from the impact of the sword intent, and he only managed to stabilize himself after taking a few steps back. Chapter 3566. The simplest way Ing Tsangqiong was defeated by Nie Tian in the first attack and admitted defeat. Ing Tsangqiong intended to suppress Nie Tian with his powerful sword intent, leaving Nie Tian with no way out. He thought that Nie Tian was only at the third heaven of sword aura, while he was at the ninth heaven of sword aura. He thought that he could suppress Nie Tian with his advantage in the sword art realm. However, he had underestimated Nie Tian. His defeat in the first attack made him realize that although Nie Tian's cultivation level was not high, his sword intent was extremely powerful and was not weaker than his. Moreover, Nie Tian's sword technique was very ingenious. He used speed to break through strength. He only used a small amount of sword intent to break through Ing Tsangqiong's sword intent. Ing Tsangqiong, you lost in the first attack because you underestimated your opponent. Nie Tian looked at Ing Tsangqiong and said with a smile, "Next, the second attack." "Alright." Ing Tsangqiong's lips twitched slightly and his eyes were filled with passion. He let out a deep roar and thrust the Qian Wu into the abyss. Instantly, the space was split into two under the impact of the sword intent. Then, the sword intent changed according to the spacetime and turned into two streams of sword intent. The two streams of sword intent were like a seamless net that shrouded Nie Tian. Seeing this, Nie Tian's eyes could not help but narrow as he exclaimed in surprise. One had to admit that Ing Tsangqiong was indeed a talented swordsman. He was able to merge his sword intent with the spacetime and use the power of the spacetime for his own use. Rumble! The two nets of sword intent shrouded Nie Tian like two giant beasts that continuously attacked the space, causing Nie Tian's ears to be filled with violent whistling sounds. Sword intent sweep. In the next moment, Nie Tian's eyes slightly narrowed, and then he made a shocking move. He held the clear sky sword horizontally in front of his chest, and then his sword intent burst out. A powerful sword wave appeared and rushed out, like a sharp blade, and directly tore apart the net of sword intent that was coming at him. Bang! Following this, a dull thud could be heard as Ing Tsangqiong's figure took a few steps back once again. There was even a bloody wound on his body. How could this be? Ing Tsangqiong steadied himself and his eyes trembled. He could not believe what he was seeing. His sword strike, which was infused with the power of time and space, was actually broken so easily by Nie Tian, and he was even injured. This was unacceptable to him. "Sorry, I won again with the second sword." Nie Tian smiled faintly, his face calm. Compared to Ing Tsangqiong, his sword essence was not strong. In fact, it was slightly weaker. However, his usage and control of the sword essence was beyond Ing Tsangqiong's expectations. He was very flexible, and he could counter changes with changes. Ing Tsangqiong's face was filled with anger. His eyes were slightly red, and he felt as if there was a huge rock weighing down on his chest. It was truly humiliating for him to lose to Nie Tian like this. If Nie Tian's sword essence was truly stronger than his, he would feel better. However, Nie Tian's sword essence was on par with his, yet it was able to suppress him. How could he accept this? At this moment, the crowd stared at Nie Tian and Ing Tsangqiong in astonishment. Although it was not a battle of life and death, the excitement of the battle between sword essences was no less than a battle of life and death. "Ing Tsangqiong, do you want to continue with the third sword?" At that moment, Nie Tian let out a faint smile and asked in a slightly provocative tone. "Continue." Ing Tsangqiong's eyes flickered, and he let out a roar like a wild beast. They were going to decide the winner with 3 sword strike. Nie Tian had already won 2 sword strike. Therefore, the result of the third sword strike would not affect the final result. However, Ing Tsangqiong was unwilling to give up. Of course he wanted to compete with the third sword strike. "Come on." Nie Tian let out a faint smile and said, "The third sword strike, it's my turn to attack first." Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, he moved. The sword in the sky suddenly pierced forward and the sword essence whistled out. It was extremely sharp and it headed straight for Ing Tsangqiong. Ing Tsangqiong felt the coldness in his face. He could not help but be surprised. He hadn't expected that Nie Tian's attack would be so straightforward. He didn't use any fancy moves, but rather directly thrust his sword forward. However, such a direct method and the sword essence contained an extremely sharp aura. He could not help but feel a tinge of fear. Break! Ing Tsangqiong reacted in an instant. The Qianwu sinking abyss pierced forward. Sword essence gushed out and a violent force was released. Boom! In the next moment the two sword essences collided. The void rumbled and a terrifying force was released in a frenzy. Ah! Ing Tsangqiong's eyes froze. He suddenly felt a terrifying sword essence coming at him. His expression changed and he let out a scream. Then, he was forced to take a few steps back. After he steadied himself, his eyes dimmed and he was shocked. In the previous attack, he and Nie Tian were evenly matched. Why did Nie Tian's sword essence have the upper hand? The third attack, I won. At that moment, Nie Tian looked at Ing Tsangqiong and said with a faint smile. Ing Tsangqiong was confused. He was stunned for a few seconds and asked, why? He could not understand how Nie Tian's attack without any tricks could explode with such a powerful force. The Great Tao is the simplest. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, usually, the simplest and most direct way is the most lethal way. Ing Tsangqiong frowned and was stunned for a few seconds. After a while, he nodded and seemed to have understood something. Nie Tian, we will have a real battle soon. After a while, Ing Tsangqiong nodded and walked down the ring. He had indeed lost the battle of sword essence. However, it did not mean that he would lose to Nie Tian in a real battle. I look forward to fighting you. Nie Tian looked at Ing Tsangqiong's figure and smiled faintly. Then, Ing Tsangqiong challenged another ringmaster and defeated him. He successfully stepped onto the ring. Half a day later, the Battle of Green Wolves ended and the 18 ringmasters appeared. Apart from the ringmaster defeated by Ing Tsangqiong, the remaining 17 ringmasters were the first batch of ringmasters. The people of Demonic Moonwolf announced the birth of the 18 Green Wolf martial artists. Based on their performance and the accumulated points from the Battle of Green Wolves, they temporarily ranked them. Among them, the top 9 were Bodhi Zi, Lan Zhuiying, Qi Sha, Yin Liujie, Su Kuanga, Ming Feng, Nie Tian, Liang Gui, and Ing Tsangqiong. For the time being, Nie Tian was ranked 7. It was not good, but it was not bad either. Although his performance in the Battle of Heavenly Wolves shocked the entire sacred world of 7 cultivators, he did not have much of a performance in the Battle of Wolf Night. Being ranked 7th was already very good. Moreover, this was only a preliminary ranking. Who would be able to reach the end would depend on the following battles. Chapter 3567. Chapter 3562. Chapter 3562 Zhang Mingfeng. The rules of the Night Wolf struggle battle were different from ordinary martial competitions. It used a challenge mode. At this time, there were only 18 martial artists left. In the first round of battles, the top 9 martial artists were temporarily safe, while the bottom 9 martial artists each had a chance to challenge. If the challenge was successful, the challenger's rank would be swapped with the challenger's. If the challenger failed, the challenger would be eliminated. For example, if a martial artist ranked 10th challenged a martial artist ranked 3rd, if he won, his name would rise to 3rd place, and the original 3rd ranked martial artist would become 10th. However, this martial artist would still have a chance to challenge someone else. If the challenger failed, he would be directly eliminated. Bodhi Zi, you are now ranked 1st. Please step onto the fighting stage. At this moment, the judge looked at Bodhi Zi and said loudly. The Bodhi child nodded slightly. His figure flickered as he stepped onto the arena. Everyone, you now have 3 minutes to consider whether or not you wish to challenge the Bodhi seed, the referee said loudly as he looked at the cultivators ranked at the bottom 9. The Nine Fate Cultivator's eyes flickered as he looked at the Bodhi Seed with fear. Everyone in Wolf Knight City knew that the Bodhi Seed was the leader of the Nine Wolves. Although his cultivation base wasn't high, his battle prowess was extremely terrifying. Furthermore, the Bodhi Seed was currently ranked number 1. Anyone who challenged it would be courting death. The 9 Fate martial artists fell silent. 3 minutes passed quickly. Bodhi Z, you can leave the stage now. The judge looked at Bodhi Z and smiled faintly. Since no one dared to challenge the Bodhi Seed, the Bodhi Seed successfully passed the first round of challenges. Next, the second place, Lan Zhuiying, went up to the stage. Still, no one dared to challenge her. Then, the third to fifth place went up the stage one by one. Still, no one challenged. The sixth place was a martial artist from the Ming clan, Ming Feng. Boom! The moment Ming Feng stepped onto the fighting ring, he released a violent flame aura from his body. Suddenly, the sky was filled with flames, as though it was going to burn the heaven and earth. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and was surprised. Ming Feng looked young, but he was in the 9th stage of heavenly charm. Previously, when Nie Tian helped Forest Wolf City fight ice and fire, he had met a Ming clan cultivator, Ming Tai. Ming Tai was also in the 9th level of heavenly charm, but his aura was much weaker than Ming Feng. Nie Tian was tens of thousands of meters away from Ming Feng and could feel the presence of the raging flame crystal surround Ming Feng. That kind of aura that could burn everything was extremely terrifying. Who wants to challenge me? Ming Feng's gaze swept across the 9 warriors and said arrogantly. The 9 martial artists were slightly stunned, and their eyes froze for a moment. No one responded. A bunch of cowards! Ming Feng sneered and reprimanded. The 9 people's faces were scarlet red, feeling extremely ashamed. When Nie Tian saw this, he couldn't help but frown. He laughed in his heart, this guy is really arrogant. Even though Ming Feng was strong, he was obviously weaker than the few people in front of him. However, his arrogance was far from what the others could compare to. Trash! After a while, Ming Feng scolded again and was about to get off the stage. I challenge you! At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out and a figure stepped onto the stage. This was a tall and sturdy warrior. His aura was vigorous, and he stood there like a mountain. Ming clansman, you are so arrogant. I want to see how strong you are. The warrior said cold. His aura surged crazily, and he took a step forward, causing the entire stage to shake violently. It's enough to kill you, Ming Feng sneered. His gaze was extremely evil. He stretched out his palm and a scarlet flame surged in his palm. Arrogant! The warrior was completely enraged. He roared and slammed his palm out. His majestic aura rolled like a raging wave and formed a giant palm in the air, pressing towards Ming Feng. Die! Ming Feng's eyes sank and a cold murderous intent flashed. Then, a raging flame crystal appeared in the air and drew a line of death in the air. In the next moment, wherever the raging flame crystal passed, the giant palm would crumble. Then, the scarlet light flew straight and pierced through the warrior's throat. That person did not even have the time to let out a final scream before his entire body instantly turned into a cloud of flying ash. The power of the raging flame crystal was terrifying. The violent aura burned everything. When everyone saw this scene, their eyes trembled and they gasped. Ming Feng's strength was indeed terrifying. His methods were ruthless and merciless. Nie Tian looked at Ming Feng and couldn't help but frown. His face didn't look good. With Ming Feng's strength, he didn't need to kill. He only needed to defeat that person. But he killed that person directly. It showed that he was a bloodthirsty person. Nie Tian, how is my raging flame crystal compared to Ming Tai's? At this time, Ming Feng suddenly looked at Nie Tian and asked cold. You are indeed much stronger than Ming Tai. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and then he smiled faintly. You can defeat Ming Tai not because the raging flame crystal is not strong but because Ming Tai is too weak. Ming Feng smiled cold and said, "Between you and me, there is destined to be a battle. I will let you die under the raging flame crystal." "Is that so?" Nie Tian laughed and declined to comment. It turned out that Ming Feng already knew that Nie Tian defeated Ming Tai and was very concerned about it. Ming Feng didn't kill that person just now because he was bloodthirsty. He wanted to let everyone see how strong the Ming clan's raging flame crystal was. "Nie Tian, cherish what you have now. You can't walk much further." Ming Feng smiled cold and no longer looked at Nie Tian. Instead, he looked at the other 8 martial artists and said arrogantly, "Is there anyone else who wants to challenge me?" The 8 martial artists were furious, but no one answered. They had already seen Ming Feng's means. He dared to kill that person just now, of course, he dared to kill them. Trash! Ming Feng sneered and jumped off the platform without waiting for the judge to say anything. The evil Moon Sky Wolf judge smiled bitterly and did not lower himself to Ming Feng's level. Then, he looked at Nie Tian and let the ladder go up. Nie Tian was ranked 7. It was time for him to go up. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He took a step and landed on the platform. He thought that with his previous limelight, no one would dare to challenge him. However, he was wrong. "I am here to challenge you." Just as he landed, a low voice was heard. Then, a martial artist's figure landed on the platform. "Huh!" Nie Tian looked at that person and could not help but frown. He smiled bitterly and said, "It seems that I am still weak in your eyes." Chapter 3568. Come at me together. Bloodline power. On the battle platform, Nie Tian looked at the phantom tombstone behind that person and couldn't help but frown. This person was very decisive and directly used his bloodline power. After Nie Tian challenged the Skywolf, he became very famous. Almost the entire 7th Cultivator's sacred world knew of his name. However, most people believed that his strength was definitely not as terrifying as the rumors said. In everyone's opinion, a 3rd-stage Heavenly Charm cultivator being able to defeat the Sky Wolf was probably due to luck. Moreover, Nie Tian had not performed too well in the Night of Wolf contest so far. The opponents he had met were not very strong, at least not as strong as these people in front of him. Of course, there was another reason why this person dared to challenge Nie Tian. Compared to others, Nie Tian's attacks were calmer. If they were to challenge someone else and lose, there was a high chance that they would be killed. However, Nie Tian was not a bloodthirsty person. He had defeated many people, but he rarely killed them. Therefore, even if some people thought that Nie Tian was very strong, they were more willing to challenge him for safety's sake. "Nie Tian, let me see if you are as strong as the rumors say." At this time, that person sneered and his aura continued to rise crazily. Behind him, a second phantom tombstone appeared. "Come." Nie Tian smiled faintly. His expression was so calm that it made people's hair stand on end. This cultivator was very strong, but in front of Lin Fan, he was not a threat at all. "Die." At that moment, the man let out an explosive roar and blurred into motion. In the next moment, 2 illusory tombstones shot towards Nie Tian like 2 dark mountains. Nie Tian felt the pressure coming towards him, but his expression was still calm. The sky sword appeared in his hand and he flicked it in the air. A sword shadow whistled out and directly shattered the 2 phantom tombstones. Bang! Immediately after, a muffled sound came from the sky. That person did not have time to resist, and was directly sent flying out of the battle platform. So strong! The shocking scene caused the eyes of the crowd to tremble. Nie Tian had only casually swung his sword, but he hadn't expected it to erupt with such terrifying power. That person flew thousands of meters away from the stage before stabilizing himself. There were several bloody wounds on his body, but his aura was very stable. It was not a fatal injury. "I've lost. Thank you, Lord Nie Tian, for showing mercy." The man took a deep breath and his expression eased slightly. He bowed to Nie Tian and thanked him. No matter how stupid he was, He already knew that Nye Tian had shown him mercy. Otherwise, he would already be a corpse. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He smiled faintly but didn't say anything. He had defeated the first challenger. Although he did not kill him, he had proven his strength. However, at this moment, the remaining 7 cultivators were still looking at Nye Tian with blazing excitement, as if they were itching to try. It seemed that the strength that Nye Tian had just displayed did not scare them. After that, 2 more people challenged Nye Tian, and both of them were defeated by him. At this moment, 4 people had already been eliminated. Only 5 challengers were left. The remaining 5 people looked at Nye Tian with complicated expressions. They wanted to challenge him, but they were also a little afraid. They were hesitating whether to challenge Nye Tian. Nye Tian was already the 7th person. After him, only Liang Gui and Ing Sangqiong were left. Liang Gui was from the Ghost Wolf mercenary group and was one of the 9 wolves. He was cruel and bloodthirsty. If one were to challenge him and lose, they would definitely die. As for Ing Sangqiong, although he had appeared out of nowhere, his sword intent was extremely powerful. He also looked cold and intimidating. Although Ing Sangqiong had lost to Nye Tian, the two were only competing in terms of sword intent. Ing Sangqiong had the cultivation of the 9th layer heavenly aura. If he fought with all his strength, he might not lose to Nye Tian. Taking everything into consideration, challenging Nye Tian was a more suitable choice. Nye Tian looked at the remaining 5 and saw through their hesitation. He smiled and said in a loud voice, "If you want to challenge me, then come at me. There's no need to be afraid. I don't want to waste time. Come at me together." Together? As soon as Nye Tian spoke, everyone's eyes widened and they all exclaimed. Who would have thought that Nye Tian would ask the remaining 5 to challenge him together? Everyone here admitted that Nye Tian was very powerful. But what he said was a little too arrogant. One should know that these 5 were all previous ringmasters. They were all 9th layer heavenly aura cultivators. Could Nye Tian really fight against all 5 of them by himself? However, at this moment, the eyes of the 5 of them were burning with excitement. They were clearly overjoyed. If they attacked together, there was a chance that they could defeat Nye Tian. Although it was laughable for the 5 of them to fight against Nye Tian, it was still an opportunity. As for how Nye Tian's ranking would be distributed among the 5, that was a matter for later. As long as they could enter the top 9, they would become the Green Wolf Master appointed by the Wolf King. At this moment, the 5 of them raised their heads and looked at the judge in the sky. "Nye Tian, have you thought it through?" The judge frowned and looked at Nye Tian from afar. "I've thought it through," Nye Tian answered with a faint smile, full of confidence. "All right." The judge bitterly smiled and said, "Then I'll let the 5 of them challenge you together." As soon as he finished speaking, the 5 figures moved. They descended from the sky and landed on the fighting ring, directly surrounding Nye Tian. "Make your move." Nye Tian glanced at the 5 of them and smiled. "I'll only give you one chance." The 5 of them frowned and were furious. It was fine that Nye Tian fought against 5 of them alone, but he dared to say that he could defeat them with one move. Arrogant! In the next moment, the 5 of them roared in unison and made their moves at the same time. Immediately, 5 surging waves of power were unleashed, causing the entire space on the fighting platform to tremble as they pressed down on Nye Tian. Very good. Nye Tian's will to fight grew even stronger when he heard the rumbling in the air. With a shout, sword intent surged out of his body, and the power of the sword formation appeared under his feet. Waves of terrifying sword intent appeared and enveloped the entire fighting ring. What a terrifying sword will! The crowd trembled in fear when they saw this scene. It was hard to imagine that Nye Tian could explode with such terrifying sword intent in an instant. Boom! 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 At this moment, 12 sword shadows appeared on the stage. Like dragons, they whistled through the air and destroyed the 5 cultivators' attack. "Get down!" In the next moment, Nye Tian let out a bellow. His body shook, and the 12 heaven-slaying swords bloomed with a loud rumble. Under the raging force, the 5 cultivators were sent flying out of the fighting ring. Nye Tian stood in the fighting ring like a sword god, shining with unparalleled sharpness. Chapter 3569. Chapter 3564. Spiritual space. Outside the fighting ring, countless pairs of eyes stared at Nye Tian in a daze, unable to react for a long time. Who would have thought that Nye Tian would defeat the 5 of them with a single move? Furthermore, he did it in such a dominating way that the 5 of them didn't even have the slightest ability to resist. Nye Tian stood on the fighting ring with a faint smile on his face. This was the first time he had used the 12 heaven-slaying sword formation with the Sky Sword, and it was much more powerful than he had expected. The Sky Sword was indeed a good sword. Not only could it maximize the power of his sword intent, but it could also greatly enhance the power of the sword formation. The Sky Sword was born from the heart of heaven and earth, and it contained the Tao of heaven and earth. It could greatly enhance both sword intent and sword formation. At this moment, the crowd finally realized how powerful Nye Tian was. After a while, the demonic Moon Wolf announced the top 9. The top 9 were the 9 lords of the Azure Wolves in this Wolf Night contest. Bodizi, Lan Zhuing, Qi Sha, Yin Liujie, Su Kuanga, Ming Feng, Nye Tian, Liang Gui, Ing Tsangqiong. At this moment, the Wolf Emperor appeared and said in a clear voice, "Congratulations to the 9 of you for becoming the 9 lords of the Wolf Night contest." As the dignified voice echoed out, the crowd looked at Nye Tian and the others from afar, their eyes filled with anticipation. The lords of the Wolf Night contest had the right to walk the path of the Sky Wolf. The cultivators who walked the path of the Sky Wolf had the chance to obtain the 9 hours of the Sky Wolf. Nye Tian's expression was very calm, not a trace of emotion could be seen on his face. He did not participate in the Wolf Night contest for the title of Lord of the Sky Wolf, nor the 9 hours of the Sky Wolf, but to become the leader of the Wolf Night contest and meet the Emperor of the Underworld. He had to know what had happened to the Emperor of the Underworld. Following that, the Wolf Emperor looked at Nye Tian's group of 9 and announced in a loud voice, "In order to avoid casualties, the following battle with Lord Cyan Wolf will be held in a spiritual space. All you need to do is communicate with that space with your divine souls and enter it to fight in place of your physical bodies." Fighting with your divine soul? As soon as he finished speaking, everyone was taken aback, and their faces were filled with astonishment. In the past, when the Night of Wolves fought for supremacy, they had never used such a method. Don't worry. Even if they fight in the spiritual space, it won't affect our view. The Wolf Emperor looked at the crowd and said loudly. Hearing the Wolf Emperor's words, everyone nodded their heads in anticipation. At this moment, Yin Liujie stepped forward and asked worriedly, "Lord Wolf Emperor, can it really represent a cultivator's true strength to fight with their divine soul?" Don't worry, that spiritual space has been specially processed, and the soul can perfectly copy the strength of the warrior, and the damage it suffers is the same as the physical body. Also, you don't have to worry about your souls being harmed. In the spiritual space, if a warrior is killed, his divine soul will automatically return, the Wolf Emperor said with a faint smile as he glanced at the 9 people. That's good, Nye Tian mumbled with a faint smile. Not only would there be no casualties in such a way, but it would also allow the warriors to fight with all their strength without any worries. Following that, the Wolf Emperor began to introduce the rules of the Lord Cyan Wolf battle. The Lord Cyan Wolf battle will determine the ranking of the 9 Lord Cyan Wolves. The first round is an elimination battle. The first 5 Lord Cyan Wolves will be safe for now, while the last 4 lords will fight one-on-one. The strongest will advance, and the loser will be eliminated. Nye Tian's eyebrows furrowed slightly as a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He was currently ranked 7th among the 9, and belonged to the last 4 lord. The other 3 were Ming Feng, who was ranked 6th, Liang Gui, who was ranked 8th, and Ing Tsangqiong, who was ranked 9th. Ming Feng, You are ranked first among the last 4, so you can choose your opponent first. At this moment, the Wolf Emperor looked at Ming Feng and said with a faint smile, "Nie Tian, get the F***ck out." Ming Feng nodded and took a step forward. His roar was as loud as thunder, and he was extremely arrogant. Nie Tian's lips twitched and he bitterly smiled. It seemed that Ming Feng was still brooding over his defeat of Ming Tai. Nie Tian took a step forward and said with a faint smile, "All right, since you want to be eliminated, I'll fulfill your wish." He was not afraid of Ming Feng, and the latter's arrogance only made him think it was funny. "Nie Tian, you should be glad that we are fighting in the spiritual space, or else you would be a corpse today." Ming Feng looked at Nie Tian and said Nie Tian coldly, "Is that so?" Nie Tian curled his lips and said, "Very soon, we will know who is the one who should be glad." The Wolf Emperor looked at the two people who were at each other's throats and could not help but smile. He knew a little about Ming Feng, and the Ming clan's flaming crystal was very powerful. However, he admired Nie Tian very much, and he was also very confident. He believed that with Nie Tian's strength, he would not be defeated by Ming Feng. "Ming Feng, Nie Tian, are you ready?" At this moment, the Wolf Emperor smiled faintly and asked, "Ready?" Ming Feng said hurriedly. He could not wait any longer. Nie Tian was very calm and he nodded slightly. The Wolf Emperor nodded, and a scroll appeared in his hand. He opened it, and instantly, a powerful formation surged out and circulated in the void. It instantly formed a huge formation, and a spiritual space appeared. Nie Tian looked at the spiritual space in the sky, and he could not help but be shocked. In this spiritual space, he could feel the extremely strong space-time force and mental strength, and the formation lines in the formation were very complicated. Even with his perceptive ability, he could not see the formation at all. What an exquisite formation! At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice was heard. He was extremely shocked by the spiritual space formation in front of him. He had seen countless formations in his life, but this was the first time he had seen such an exquisite formation in front of him. Unexpectedly, someone can combine the space-time force and mental strength in a formation so perfectly, it is really incredible. The Ghost Emperor exclaimed, and his eyes were wide open. Nie Tian's eyes changed slightly. It was really rare to see a formation that could make the Ghost Emperor exclaim in such a way. "Please!" The Wolf Emperor looked at Nie Tian and Ming Feng and said with a faint smile, "Nie Tian, I will kill you in my spiritual space first, and then I will kill you again outside." Ming Feng looked at Nie Tian, the corners of his mouth curved into a cold smile, and said in a deep voice. Then, he moved his consciousness and communicated with the spiritual space, and a wisp of his spirit directly entered the spiritual space. "You want to kill me so badly, don't you?" Nie Tian laughed. With a thought, his soul entered his soul space. At this moment, everyone was looking at the spiritual space, and their eyes were focused on the two figures. They were looking forward to the next battle. Chapter 3570. Unable to withstand a single blow. Chapter 3565. Collapse. Floating in his soul space, Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly as he muttered to himself, "This divine soul grand formation is indeed powerful." He originally thought that after entering the divine soul formation, no matter how realistic it would be different from outside. But at this moment, he sensed his martial body and found nothing different. In this way, he could fight without any worries in the divine soul space. "Nie Tian, I'll show you the real power of the flaming crystal." At this moment, Ming Feng looked at Nie Tian coldly and took a step forward. Suddenly, a terrifying aura was released from his body. A blazing power surged out as if it was going to tear the space apart and burn it. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he smiled faintly. "Ming Feng, you think too highly of yourself. In my opinion, your flaming crystal is the same as Ming Tai's, unable to withstand a single blow. You're courting death. Ming Feng was infuriated by Nie Tian's words. He roared and suddenly, balls of crimson flames appeared behind him. They were like fiery magical beasts, extremely violent. Boom! In the next moment, Ming Feng took a step forward and the flaming crystal on his body moved crazily. It was as if thousands of flames were rushing towards Nie Tian. Suddenly, there was an ear-piercing whistling sound in the void, violent and blazing. Facing Ming Feng's powerful attack, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. His expression did not change much, but there was an additional touch of coldness in his eyes. Since Ming Feng had been looking down on him, then he would use his own strength to make him remember it forever. 9 limits of starry sky, moonfall. At this moment, just as the flaming crystal was about to fall, Nie Tian's lips twitched and he made his move. He stabbed out with the sky sword in his hand. The sword essence gushed out and the sword radiance shot out for tens of thousands of meters. Boom! Boom! Then, the extreme powers collided with each other and the void rumbled. Following that, there was a dull sound. Ming Feng's figure shook in the air and then collapsed. At the same time, Ming Feng, who was outside the soul space, felt his god soul shake. He took a few steps back and almost fell down. The sudden scene caused everyone's eyes to tremble. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak for a long time. One sword strike, with just one sword strike, Nie Tian had killed Ming Feng. How was this possible? Ming Feng was a genius of the Ming clan who possessed the flaming crystal bloodline. Moreover, he was one of the 9 wolves. Shouldn't he be very strong? Why was he so vulnerable in front of Nie Tian? The crowd was dumbfounded, unable to believe the scene in front of them. Impossible! After a while, Ming Feng finally reacted and growled. His entire person was like an enraged wild beast. His eyes were red like fire and it was obvious that he was extremely furious. At this moment, Nie Tian's divine soul also came out. He smiled faintly and said to Ming Feng, "I've said it before. You're the same as Ming Tai, unable to withstand a single blow." His voice was not loud but every word was like a clear slap on Ming Feng's face. "I'll kill you." Ming Feng's eyes trembled and he growled again. Then, his body moved and he wanted to attack Nie Tian. "How dare you!" But just at this time, a low voice was heard and a vast pressure appeared and suddenly descended. It was like a huge mountain that pressed down on Ming Feng's body and he was unable to move. "Lord Wolf King!" The crowd's eyes trembled and they looked at the Wolf King in shock. "Don't do it again." The Wolf King's face was dark and his eyes were cold. He looked at Ming Feng and said coldly, "Yes." Ming Feng's body was drenched in cold sweat. He calmed down and nodded. No matter how arrogant he was, he would not dare to disobey the Wolf King. The Wolf Emperor's wolf-like eyes were like 2 abysses. They were terrifying to the extreme, as if they could directly devour a person. The battle continues. The Wolf King withdrew his chi and said cold, ignoring Ming Feng. The crowd heaved a sigh of relief, but their faces were still filled with shock. Then, it was time for the battle between Ing Sangqiong and Liang Gui. "Nie Tian, there is still a battle between us." Before Ing Sangqiong entered the spiritual space, he looked at Nie Tian from afar and said, "I'll wait for you." Nie Tian's lips twitched and he said with a faint smile. Although Ing Sangqiong was currently ranked 9th among the top 9, Nie Tian knew that his strength should not be underestimated. It was only because Ing Sangqiong had lost to Nie Tian previously that his ranking was slightly lower. Ing Sangqiong's opponent was Liang Gui. The latter's most terrifying technique was the ghost prison of 8 desolation. At the beginning of the battle, Ing Sangqiong was indeed beaten by the ghost prison of 8 desolation. However, he quickly recovered and defeated Liang Gui with a shocking sword intent, successfully advancing to the next round. Why does his sword intent give me an inexplicable sense of familiarity? Ing Sangqiong's victory did not surprise Nie Tian. What puzzled him was that Ing Sangqiong's sword intent gave him a strange sense of familiarity. However, the familiarity was not strong. Nie Tian could not recall where he had seen a similar sword intent. After Ing Sangqiong defeated Liang Gui, it was time for the battle between Liang Gui and Ming Feng to determine the 8th and 9th rankings. In the end, Ming Feng defeated Liang Gui by a slight margin and obtained the 8th rank. On the other hand, Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong successfully advanced to the top 7. At this moment, the first round of battles had ended. There were some slight changes in the ranking of the top 7. From the top to the bottom, they were Bodhi Zi, Lan Zhuying, Qi Sha, Nie Tian, Yin Liujie, Su Kuanga, and Ing Sangqiong. Nie Tian's performance in the first round of battles was stunning, killing Ming Feng with a single strike. Hence, he advanced to the 4th rank. The rules for the second round of battles were similar to the first round. The first 3 Masters of Green Wolves would be safe for the time being. The remaining 4 Masters of Green Wolves would fight one-on-one. The strongest would advance to the next round and the loser would be eliminated. At this moment, Nie Tian's ranking was the highest among the 4. He had the right to choose his opponent. Nie Tian glanced at Yin Liujie, Su Kuanga, and Ing Sangqiong. The 3 of them had different reactions. It was obvious that Yin Liujie was avoiding him. He did not want to fight against Nie Tian. Su Kuanga's face was calm. He did not run away nor did he have any desire. On the other hand, Ing Sangqiong's eyes flickered. It was obvious that he wanted to fight against Nie Tian. He knew that the following battles would become more and more intense. If he did not fight against Nie Tian now, he might not have the chance to. However, Nie Tian did not have the intention to choose Ing Sangqiong. He wanted to fight against Yin Liujie. Nie Tian, it's time for us to fight. Just as he was about to speak, Ing Sangqiong stood up and said loudly. Nie Tian's gaze froze. He hesitated for a while before he laughed and said, "As you wish." Chapter 3571. Chapter 3566. Chapter 3566. Out of control in his spiritual space, Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong stood proudly like 2 peerless swords, sharp and dazzling. The fierce aura they emitted seemed to be able to pierce through the world. Ing Sangqiong looked at Nie Tian with burning eyes and said in a deep voice, "Nie Tian, you won't be able to beat me in the last competition of sword intent, but you might not be able to beat me in this real battle. Let's fight." Nie Tian smiled and didn't waste any time. Ing Sangqiong was not only a swordsman of the 9th heaven of swordsmanship, he was also a holy disciple of the 9th heaven of swordsmanship. Nie Tian was at least of the 3rd heaven of swordsmanship. Ing Sangqiong naturally thought that although his swordsmanship was weaker than Nie Tian's, he could definitely fight against Nie Tian in terms of martial arts and swordsmanship. However, he would soon realize that he was wrong. Very wrong. "Alright," Ing Sangqiong replied. The Qianwu abyssal sword appeared in his hand. Instantly, a strong killing intent appeared, filling up the space within a 10,000-meter radius. Following which, a majestic sword intent gushed out from the abyssal sword. It was like thousands of sharp blades, violently attacking the space around them. Heaven and earth, one stroke against the heavens. In the next moment, Ing Sangqiong growled and the Qianwu abyssal sword streaked across the sky. Suddenly, the shadow of a sword broke through the air, like a giant beast that had just emerged from the primordial chaos. It pounced ferociously, causing the sky to rumble and the space to seem like it was about to collapse. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and was secretly surprised. Ing Sangqiong was indeed terrifying when he went all out. However, he wasn't afraid at all. His eyes flashed with the desire to fight. Encountering such a sword Dao opponent of equal strength made him inexplicably excited. Boom! Nie Tian lashed out with his sword. The celestial demon's sword soared into the sky and the space shook. The sword light in the air was dazzling. Kaboom! Chi chi chi! In the next instant, the 2 swords collided with each other, causing a deafening explosion that shook the heavens and earth, following which, an ear-piercing sound of impact could be heard as the two swords devoured each other like flames. Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong retreated 100 meters at the same time, then steadied themselves at the same time. When their swords collided, the two were actually equally matched. Very good. At that instant, Ing Sangqiong let out a roar and lashed out with the Qian Wu abyssal once again, which was even more ferocious than the previous slash. Boom! Nie Tian was very calm as he responded with a sword. Two sword shadows spun and once again, the two of them were forced to retreat. After that, Ing Sangqiong seemed to have gone mad as he slashed out with his sword again and again. However, no matter how crazy he was, Nie Tian was able to easily neutralize his attacks and did not fall into a disadvantageous position at all. Boom! At that moment, the crowd saw that in the spiritual space, sword rays were blinding and the entire space was completely engulfed by surging sword intent. They could no longer see the figures of Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong. Bang! In the spiritual space, a muffled sound was heard. Nie Tian's figure was forced back a few hundred meters before he managed to stabilize himself. On the other side, Ing Sangqiong was forced back 1,000 meters and he was injured. Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong's sword intent were originally similar and their martial arts strength was also very close. However, Nie Tian's martial body was far more powerful than Ing Sangqiong's. Although they seemed to be evenly matched on the surface, Ing Sangqiong couldn't hold on any longer as they clashed again and again. Ing Sangqiong, there is no need to continue this battle. Just admit defeat. At that moment, Nie Tian steadied himself and said loudly, "Impossible!" At that moment, Ing Sangqiong seemed to have gone mad. His eyes were bloodshot and he was extremely violent. Sword intent was released from his body and he suddenly shouted, "Nie Tian, I will kill you!" Nie Tian's eyes froze. He felt a very violent, murderous aura from Ing Sangqiong's body. This was very abnormal for a pure swordsman. It's time to end this. Nie Tian frowned and his eyes froze. The Celestial Evolution Saint's soul gushed out from his body, and the Celestial Evolution Saint power rushed into his martial body, causing his sword principal realm to suddenly skyrocket. Boom! In the next moment, he stabbed with his sword. The extremely violent sword shadow was like a terrifying dragon that pressed down angrily. Ah! Ing Sangqiong obviously did not expect Nie Tian's sword principal realm to skyrocket in an instant. Caught off guard, he screamed and was directly drowned by the sword shadow. His divine soul disappeared. After a while, the spiritual space returned to normal. However, only Nie Tian was left standing in the air. Nie Tian won again. Everyone's eyes flickered and they were extremely shocked. In the spiritual space, only Nie Tian was left. Without a doubt, he had won again. Why? At that moment, Ing Sangqiong seemed to have gone mad. He suddenly roared and his eyes were bloodshot. An extremely strong murderous aura surged from his body. Seeing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown, and his expression flickered. With a thought, he withdrew his divine soul. Nie Tian. At that moment, Ing Sangqiong suddenly raised his head and stared at Nie Tian with a murderous look. He roared, "Why are you the master of the sky? Why are you able to merge with the heart of the sky? Why?" Nie Tian frowned when he heard about the master of the sky and the heart of the sky. His expression changed. He finally understood why Ing Sangqiong had appeared. It turned out that he was here for the heart of the sky. But how did Ing Sangqiong know about the heart of the sky? More strangely, why did Ing Sangqiong suddenly lose control? Nie Tian, his divine soul is unstable. Hurry up and wake him up. Just then, Emperor Ghost's voice was heard and he said nervously. Nie Tian agreed. Then, his eyes flickered and he roared, "Ing Sangqiong, wake up!" The moment he spoke, A spiritual attack was released from his eyes, and it directly hit Ing Sangqiong's divine soul. Ing Sangqiong's body shook and his eyes quivered. Then, as if he had just woken up from a dream, he woke up. What happened to me? He was stunned for a moment and immediately recalled what had just happened. His face was full of shock. Even he himself did not know why he had suddenly lost control. It's okay now. Nie Tian faintly smiled and turned around to look at the spiritual space in the sky. Ing Sangqiong's sword intent was pure. He was definitely not a bloodthirsty person. For him to suddenly lose control, he was definitely affected by some kind of spiritual power. Just now, when Nie Tian and Ing Sangqiong were fighting in the spiritual space, the space was filled with terrifying spiritual power. It was very likely that it had affected Ing Sangqiong. It seemed that the formation of the spiritual space was not harmless to martial artists. Chapter 35-72. The Four Wolves. Upon hearing the Wolf Emperor's words, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown. He did not expect the Wolf Emperor to admit it so easily. The Wolf Emperor only said that the spiritual space had a certain influence on a warrior's divine sense. However, in Nie Tian's opinion, the spiritual space was not as simple as it seemed. Ing Sangqiong was a genius in swordsmanship. He was so powerful at such a young age. His willpower was extraordinary. Ing Sangqiong did not stay in the spiritual space for long, but he lost control of his divine sense. It was evident how much the mental formation in the spiritual space stimulated a warrior. As for Nie Tian, he was fine because his mental energy was stronger than an ordinary warrior's, and he had the help of the demon fox of eternal night. This is my own business. It has nothing to do with others. Ing Sangqiong frowned when he heard the Wolf Emperor's words and said coldly. It was obvious that he did not want to talk about the heart of the sky with others. The Wolf Emperor frowned, but he was not angry. He did not say much and only waved his hand to signal for the battle to continue. Ing Sangqiong, are you all right now? Nie Tian looked at Ing Sangqiong and asked in a low voice. Thank you. Ing Sangqiong nodded and thanked him. He looked away and hesitated for a moment. Suddenly, he sent a voice transmission to Nie Tian and said, I am from the Qiankuan sect. The Qiankuan sect? Nie Tian was stunned when he heard the name. He looked confused. The heart of the sky is guarded by 5 forces. The Qiankuan sect is one of them. Ing Sangqiong sent another voice transmission. He looked pained and said, I have known about the heart of the sky since I was young. My family saw me as their hope. Everyone believed that I could merge with the heart of the sky and become the master of the sky. However, you entered the sky swordsmanship school before me and became the master of the sky. Nie Tian looked at Ing Sangqiong and his face darkened. He was speechless. It seemed like the Wolf Emperor was right. Ing Sangqiong was indeed obsessed with the heart of the sky. Although Ing Sangqiong's words were simple, Nie Tian could sense his desire for the heart of the sky from his words. It was no wonder that Ing Sangqiong took the initiative to propose a contest of sword essence when he fought with Nie Tian for the first time. He wanted to see if Nie Tian's sword essence was really stronger than his. After Nie Tian defeated him, he still didn't want to give up, so there was a second battle. But in the second battle, he still lost. Nie Tian, you are indeed stronger than me. At that moment, Ing Sangqiong suddenly raised his head and looked at Nie Tian. The corners of his lips curled into a faint smile as he said, From now on I, Ing Sangqiong, recognize you as the master of the sky. Thank you. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. Ing Sangqiong's sudden change of heart left him at a loss. To be able to calmly admit his weakness, Ing Sangqiong was indeed a pure sword essence swordsman. Nie Tian smiled faintly and let out a long breath. He felt much more relaxed, but he still felt a little strange. Why was Ing Sangqiong able to find him? But Ing Sangqiong didn't say, so he didn't ask. At that moment, Su Kuanga and Yin Liujie appeared in the spiritual space, ready to fight. I hope this battle will end soon. Nie Tian looked at Su Kuanga, frowned and said worriedly. Ing Sangqiong was indeed obsessed with the heart of the sky, but his loss of control was still caused by the spiritual space. He was worried that if Su Kuanga stayed in the spiritual space for too long, he would also be in danger of losing control. Kill! At that moment, the battle between Yin Liujie and Su Kuanga began. Yin Liujie growled and took the initiative to attack. Roar! Roar! Suddenly, two giant wolves appeared in the void. They were the Ice Wolf and the Flame Wolf. Like an iceberg and a volcano, they crazily pressed towards Su Kuanga. Su Kuanga stirred the Night Wolf in his hand and a terrifying spear shadow appeared, directly bombarding the Ice Wolf and the Flame Wolf. Rumble! Immediately, the void rumbled, the spear shadow and the two giant wolves almost collapsed at the same time. The terrifying power was like a raging wave, rushing towards the surroundings, raging violently. Su Kuanga and Yin Liujie were both Nine Wolves martial artists, and their strength was almost the same. At this time, they used their full strength and were evenly matched. Then, the two exchanged a few more moves, but they were still evenly matched. Su Kuanga, you are stronger than I thought, but the battle between us is over. At this time, the corner of Yin Liujie's mouth twitched coldly, and then his whole body released a terrifying aura, like a dark light, constantly circulating around his body. This battle is indeed over, but the one who will lose will not be me. Su Kuanga frowned, smiled coldly, and then crazily released the aura of his whole body. A vigorous sword intent surged out, hitting the void, unusually vigorous. The last move. Nie Tian frowned, his face slightly changed. Obviously, Yin Liujie and Su Kuanga were going to use their strongest power at the same time. The next move would determine the victor between the two of them. Boom! Su Kuanga's whole body crazily surged. His whole body was like a sky-splitting spear, extremely sharp. The dark aura on Yin Liujie's body became more and more intense, as if he had released some kind of seal power, urging the power of the bloodline in his body to the extreme. Kill! At this time, Su Kuanga roared, and the wolf in the night slashed out. The spear was like a dragon. The terrifying spear shadow seemed to tear the world apart. The void whistled, and the murderous aura filled the air, pressing towards Yin Liujie. Come! Almost at the same time, Yin Liujie roared, and then four giant wolves appeared behind him. Ice Wolf, Flame Wolf, Wind Wolf, and Dark Wolf. Nie Tian's eyes slightly narrowed. He did not expect Yin Liujie to be able to release the power of four wolves at the same time. Roar! The next moment, the four giant wolves roared at the same time, and then their figures moved like four mountains, rushing towards the spear shadow in the air. Bang! 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 Immediately, the four giant wolves hit the spear shadow, and a muffled explosion sound broke out in the void. The spear shadow stagnated in the air, stabilized for a moment, and then directly collapsed. Although Su Kuanga's spear shadow was terrifying, it still couldn't resist the power of Yin Liujie's four wolves. Ah! The next moment, a scream sounded. Su Kuanga's figure was swallowed by the giant wolves, directly disappeared, and his divine soul returned. Outside the divine soul space, Su Kuanga's body trembled, took a step back, and then stabilized himself. Are you okay? At this time, Nie Tian's figure came to Su Kuanga's side, and asked nervously. I'm fine. Su Kuanga felt that his divine soul was a little unstable, and immediately took a deep breath, which improved a little, and nodded slightly. Nie Tian sensed Su Kuanga's divine soul, and after confirming that it had stabilized, he nodded and relaxed. Then, he looked at Yin Liujie. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Yin Liujie actually defeated Su Kuanga, which made him a little surprised. However, Yin Liujie and Su Kuanga were both nine wolves, and their strength was almost the same, so it was normal for the two to win. Chapter 3573. Sword Technique. Yin Liujie's eyes were cold and filled with killing intent, like a ferocious beast that wanted to eat people. all right. Facing the naked threat, Nie Tion's reaction was very calm, and he only smiled. He had never been afraid of Liujie, even if the latter's aura was strong. He did not feel threatened at all. Liujie won the battle between Su Kuanga and Liujie. Next was the ranking battle between Songqiong and Su Kuanga. But Songqiong took the initiative to propose that he accept the previous ranking, and was ranked behind Su Kuanga. He could already see that there was something strange about the divine spiritual space. The Wolf Emperor did not say anything, and nodded in agreement. In this way, the 6th place was Su Kuanga, and the 7th place was Songqiong. And after the second round of battle, the ranking changed again, from front to back: Bodhi Zi, Lan Zhuing, Qisha, Liujie, Nie Tian. Because Liujie had released 4 wolves at the same time, it shocked everyone, so his ranking was in front of Nie Tian. The rules of the third round of battle were similar to before. The first Green Wolf Master was safe for the time being, the other 4 Green Wolf Masters would fight one-on-one, the strongest would advance, and the loser would be eliminated. At this time, the one who was ranked at the front of the 4 was Lan Zhuing. She had the right to choose her opponent. Lan Zhuing's gaze swept across Nie Tian and the other 2, and finally fell on Nie Tian, and said lightly, "Nie Tian, go to battle." Okay. Nie Tian smiled lightly. He was not surprised that Lan Zhuing chose him as her opponent. Previously in the Sky Wolf Challenge, Lan Zhuing had fought with Nie Tian, and Nie Tian took 3 of her sword strikes, forcing her to admit defeat. At this time, Nie Tian and Lan Zhuing's divine souls appeared in the divine spiritual space at the same time. The crowd looked at the 2 and couldn't help but discuss. Nie Tian has encountered this swordswoman. I'm afraid his path as the Green Wolf will come to an end here. Just who is that swordswoman? I heard that she lost to Nie Tian when she challenged Sirius. I wonder if that's true? She did lose to Nie Tian, but her 3 sword strikes completely suppressed Nie Tian. Nie Tian was only able to block 3 of them. But now is the moment of life and death. She won't give Nie Tian any chance. That swordswoman once gave orders to the Yinyang elders. I wonder who she is. She's probably a genius from a higher sacred world. As the crowd spoke, they couldn't help but look at Nie Tian with sympathy. If Nie Tian's opponent had been Liujie, he might have been able to go further, but he had encountered Lan Zhuing. Nie Tian, I underestimated you when I lost to you in the wolf slave field. This time, I'll give it my all. Lan Zhuing said indifferently in the divine spiritual space. Her beautiful eyes flickered with a cold light, and the sword intent around her surged with a sharp murderous intent. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he sensed the murderous intent. This was the first time he had seen such a sharp murderous intent from Lan Zhuing. It seemed that Lan Zhuing was really going to give it her all this time. Boom. Afterwards, Lan Zhuing unleashed a terrifying sword aura. Streaks of blue sword light circulated in the air like halos, forming ripples of light. Icy blue runes appeared around her eyes. Sword spirit body. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth curved into a smile. His whole body was full of fighting intent. In the battle in the wolf slave field, Nie Tian already knew that Lan Zhuing had the sword spirit body, an extremely rare bloodline martial body. Warriors with the sword spirit body had the sword essence of heaven and earth in their bloodline. If this special bloodline martial body was developed to the extreme, the swordsman could integrate with heaven and earth and comprehend the supreme sword essence of heaven and earth. Lan Zhuing directly activated the sword spirit body. Obviously, she regarded Nie Tian as a real opponent. Blue sea reflects the moon, 9-layered waves. The next moment, the sword intent around Lan Zhuing's body soared to the extreme. The blue sea reflects the moon, the original spirit sword, streaked across the void, and suddenly the ice-blue sword intent bloomed. 9 wild waves appeared in the air, like giant beasts in the sea, pressing down on Nie Tian. What a strong sword intent! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was quite surprised in his heart. Lan Zhuying was indeed a swordsman at the first level of the oracle realm. The instantaneous explosive power of the sword intent was really amazing. The rolling waves seemed to contain an endless amount of sword intent, layer after layer, majestic and boundless, giving off a sense of awe-inspiring oppression. It was obvious that during the battle in the wolf-slave field, Lan Zhuying did not use her real strength. Now she went all out. You are too naive to think that you can defeat me with one sword. At this time, Nie Tian's eyes flickered slightly, and he smiled faintly. Then, he released the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit and the Omniscient Saint Spirit at the same time, and a terrible holy power rushed into the 100 meridians of the martial body, stimulating his sword intent to the extreme. Boom! The sword intent suddenly erupted like a mad dragon. A strong murderous aura surged around Nie Tian, as if it wanted to tear the world apart. Unity of heaven and man, Yang Chen sacrifice. Then, the corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched and he said softly. The sky sword slashed in the air, and the sword's shadow was like a mountain, shaking the void. Bang! 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 The sword's shadow was like a dragon, crashing into the 9-fold raging waves, and a terrible roar came from the void. Waves of power raged crazily, extremely sharp. This was the most direct collision between the sword intent and the sword move. The power contained in the sword intent burst out like thousands of sharp blades, striking the void, making ear-piercing whistling sounds. So strong! The crowd couldn't help but shiver when they saw this scene, and they couldn't help but exclaim. The battle between Nie Tian and Lan Zhuying in the divine soul space, and the crowd couldn't feel any energy fluctuations. But the scene and the state of the divine soul space allowed them to directly see the intensity of the battle. But at this time, the most shocking thing was Nie Tian's power. It was unimaginable that a warrior in the 3rd level of heaven rhythm could burst out such a terrifying power. Bang! At this moment, 2 muffled sounds were heard, and Nie Tian and Lan Zhuying's figures were sent flying at the same time. How is this possible? Lan Zhuying retreated a few hundred meters, and after regaining her balance, she couldn't help but gasp in shock when she looked at Nie Tian. She had already felt that Nie Tian's sword intent aura had increased by a lot, and now she was sure that Nie Tian's sword Dao realm had increased from the 3rd level to the 7th level. But how was this possible? A swordsman was actually able to raise his sword intent realm in an instant. Moreover, his sword intent had risen by 4 levels. It was truly unbelievable. Lan Zhuying, your sword intent is stronger than mine, but my sword moves are stronger than yours. Nie Tian steadied himself, and his eyes flickered. He ignored Lan Zhuying's surprise and said calmly. The first attack between the two was purely a competition of sword Dao strength. Even though Nie Tian had increased his sword Dao strength to the 7th level with the help of the 2 Saint Souls, his sword intent was still weaker than Lan Zhuying's. After all, the latter was a swordsman at the 1st level of the Oracle realm. But the sword moves that Nie Tian used were more brilliant than Lan Zhuying's. The sacred heaven-defying sword was comprehended from the tri-element sacred array, and it was far more powerful than ordinary sword technique. Chapter 3574. Chapter 3569. Sword Intent. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with astonishment as he sensed the fluctuation of sword intent in the air. He didn't expect that Lan Zhuying's sword intent would increase once again. Nie Tian, I've said it before, I will give it my all in this battle. Lan Zhuying's eyes flickered with coldness as she said in a deep voice, Since I will give it my all, you won't stand a chance. That's not for sure. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as his lips curled into a faint smile. He didn't dislike strong opponents, on the contrary, he liked them very much. If his opponents were all weak, then what was the point of such a battle? Blue ocean reflecting the moon, killing of the cold moon. Lan Zhuying's beautiful eyes abruptly narrowed. After that, the jade sea mirroring moon arced through the air, as though the space couldn't withstand the sword pressure. A low rumbling sound rang out as an icy blue mark appeared. That boundless sword intent actually condensed into an icy blue moon in the air. Very good. Nie Tian's eyes flickered as the corner of his mouth twitched. He seemed to be extremely excited. The stronger Lan Zhuiying was, the more he wanted to fight. Die. Lan Zhuiying let out a deep roar and the ice-blue moon suddenly moved. Like a blue wild beast, it charged towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's lips twitched as he stomped his foot on the ground. Instantly, numerous sword inscriptions appeared and a terrifying aura of sword intent spread out for tens of thousands of meters. Sword sealing forbidden array, demon sword burning the world. In the next moment, the Haotian sword in his hand fell. Suddenly, there was a roar in the air, and a terrible shadow of the sword appeared. The light of the sword was dazzling, and a terrible sword will burned like fire, as if it wanted to burn everything. The scene in the spiritual space made everyone's eyes tremble as they gasped. Lan Zhuiying and Nie Tian were too strong. That kind of endless power was so strong that even the spiritual space could feel its destructive power. Boom! Boom! In Ji Hao's spiritual space, a thunderous boom covered the whole world, as if it was going to destroy everything. Bang! Chi chi chi! In the next moment, two extremely strong sword intents collided with each other. The heavens and earth roared, and the void seemed to be destroyed. The incomparably violent power collided violently, annihilating everything, and the ear-piercing sound reverberated endlessly. Nie Tian and Lan Zhuiying stepped back at the same time, almost to the edge of Nie Tian's spiritual space. Not only did Nie Tian use the power of the sword formation in this attack, but he also integrated the power of the heavenly Tao shackles into it, causing the sword intent within the sword formation to be even more violent. Even so, Nie Tian was still at a disadvantage in this clash of swords. After he steadied himself, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. After all, Lan Zhuiying was a swordsman at the first sky of the Oracle realm, and her sword intent contained the power of Oracle. Even if Nie Tian used the double Saint Souls, he could not make up for the gap between their sword intents. Nie Tian, how many more attacks can you take? Lan Zhuiying stood in the air, her eyes cold, and said coldly, "It's not that easy for you to defeat me." Nie Tian smiled faintly. The blood at the corner of his mouth disappeared, and he regained his previous fierceness. "I'd like to see if you can still be so arrogant after my next attack." Lan Zhuiying smiled coldly, and a fierce, killing intent burst out from her body. Then she took a step forward, and the blue sea reflects the moon was swung out. An icy blue, killing intent appeared in the void, and suddenly fell on Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned slightly, and then he swung his sword in the opposite direction. Rumble! In the spiritual space, violent roars came one after another. The crowd could no longer see the figures of Nie Tian and Lan Zhuiying. They could only see two different kinds of sword lights, colliding and devouring each other. After a while, the aura of the sword intent in the spiritual space weakened slightly, and Nie Tian and Lan Zhuiying appeared again. After a few exchanges of sword strikes, Nie Tian's body was covered in a few wounds. However, his expression was still calm and tranquil, without the slightest fluctuation. Lan Zhuiying was not injured, but her pretty face did not look good. She even looked a bit ferocious, and her whole body was filled with a strong killing intent. Sure enough, the spiritual space has a great impact on a warrior's soul consciousness. Nie Tian looked at Lan Zhuiying, frowned slightly, and thought to himself, although Lan Zhuiying was competitive, she was definitely not a cruel and bloodthirsty person. At this moment, her state was completely different from when she fought with Nie Tian in the wolf-slave field. The killing intent in her body was like a beast that had been aroused, soaring wildly and completely uncontrollable. It seemed that in the spiritual space, there was a hidden spiritual power that could stimulate the beast hidden deep in a warrior's body. "Nye Tian, you are stronger than I thought. But this battle is over." At this moment, Lan Zhuing said cold. Then, her whole body's aura surged crazily. Suddenly, 9 horrible sword intents appeared and kept circulating around her body. Sword aura! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was surprised. It seemed that Lan Zhuing would really use all her strength for the next attack. She actually gathered the power of 9 sword auras at the same time. Even for a swordsman at the first sky of Oracle, it was not easy to gather 9 sword auras at the same time. "Come on!" The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched. His body shook, and outside his body, 7 horrible auras of sword intents appeared and surged crazily. They were the 7 sword auras. After activating the double Saint Souls, his sword principle had reached the amazing 7th sky of sword aura. But he was still a swordsman at the 3rd sky of sword aura. At this moment, he could gather 7 sword auras, which showed how terrifying his understanding and control of sword intent was. This boy is really scary. Outside the spiritual space, the Wolf Emperor looked at Nye Tian, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble in surprise. Generally speaking, swordsmen could only gather sword auras under extreme circumstances. Even for swordsmen at the 7th sky of sword aura, very few could gather 7 sword auras. But Nye Tian could gather 7 sword auras. It was really scary. On the other side, the Bodhi seed frowned and said in a deep voice, "Nye Tian, your talent in sword principle is beyond my expectations." He was a swordsman, and his understanding of sword intent was better than that of ordinary people. He knew very well how difficult it was to gather 7 sword auras. Nye Tian was indeed a swordsman with the sword heart of heaven and earth. "Kill!" At this moment, Lan Zhuing let out a low roar. Her eyes were dark red, and she looked extremely violent. The azure sea reflecting the moon slashed down, and the void trembled as if it couldn't bear the terrible sword pressure and was about to collapse. Chapter 3575. "You're dead. Come!" Nye Tian's lips twitched as he sensed the boundless pressure of the sword. His eyes were not filled with fear, but a strong battle intent. Lan Zhuing was indeed powerful, but Nye Tian was fearless. He did not plan to use his heaven-defying strength. He did not plan to use the extreme demon seal or the earthly destruction spirit. He only planned to use his sword intent and martial body to defeat Lan Zhuing. If he couldn't resist this sword, he would accept it even if he lost. The icy blue beast was like a mountain, crushing downward as if it was going to devour the heavens and earth. The violent aura was getting closer and closer to Nye Tian. Bang! At that instant, the sword aura surrounding Nye Tian grew stronger. The sword intent condensed outside his body like a whirlpool, causing his aura to grow stronger. The 7 sword intents were like 7 long snakes that revolved around him, triggering the violent force contained within the sword intent. 9 limits of the starry sky, the 6th limit, sun destruction. In the next second, Nye Tian finally spoke. His eyes darkened as he raised the sword of sky in his hand. As the blade landed, a dark shadow of a sword appeared, leaving a dark mark in the sky. It was as if a dark beast had walked out from a bottomless abyss, trying to devour everything. At that moment, the crowd's eyes flickered as the shock in their hearts increased. It was unbelievable that Nye Tian was able to unleash such a terrifying force in an instant. Bang! In the next second, the icy blue beast and the dark shadow of the sword collided into each other, causing the sky to explode. The violent force was like a giant wave in a tsunami, destroying everything in its path. The crowd was stunned as they stared at the spiritual space. However, they could not see Nye Tian and Lan Zhuing's figures. Under the impact of the terrifying force, the 2 figures were drowned in it. Bang bang bang, chi chi chi, terrifying powers clashed against each other, causing ear-piercing booms that filled the entire spiritual space. Waves of terrifying powers were like wild beasts that could devour and destroy everything. After a long while, the spiritual space finally became clear. When the wild force dispersed, a figure appeared in front of everyone. His whole body was covered in blood, but he was like a sharp sword, incomparably sharp, standing in the void. Nia Tian. Everyone's eyes trembled as they immediately recognized that figure. It was Nia Tian. In the end, the one who was still standing in the spiritual space was still Nia Tian. Impossible! In Ji Hao's spiritual space, a shrill voice was heard. Lan Zhuing seemed to have lost her mind. Her eyes were filled with killing intent, which was incomparably cold. She couldn't accept that she would lose to Nia Tian. Although she had already lost to Nia Tian once, she did not use her full strength at that time, and treated it as a joke. But this time, she had truly lost to Nia Tian. I don't believe it. In the next second, Lan Zhuing let out a roar, as if she had lost her mind. Lan Zhuing. At this moment, Nia Tian's qi returned. He let out a low roar and his eyes flickered. A wave of spiritual energy was released and landed directly on Lan Zhuing's qi. Lan Zhuing's body trembled slightly, and the redness in her eyes disappeared. She gradually calmed down. What's going on? After Lan Zhuing calmed down, her beautiful eyes trembled slightly. She couldn't believe that she had just behaved like that. It's fine now. Nia Tian smiled faintly. Then, he suddenly turned around and locked his fierce eyes on the Wolf Emperor. Ing Sangqiong and Lan Zhuing had both lost control. Nobody would believe that there was nothing strange in the spiritual space. I've said it before. The spiritual space has a certain influence on a cultivator's divine sense. The Wolf Emperor knew what Nia Tian was thinking. He smiled and said, "Perhaps Lan Zhuing really wants to defeat you." The corner of Nia Tian's lips twitched when he heard the Wolf Emperor's words. He smiled and said, "You make it sound so easy, Lord Wolf Emperor." The Wolf Emperor smiled and did not speak further. "Your Highness, are you all right?" At that instant, a deep voice was heard. Then, a figure appeared beside Lan Zhuing. He seemed extremely nervous. Nia Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at the man, and he exclaimed in surprise. He did not expect Yin Yang Elder to be here. It turned out that Yin Yang Elder had been here all along. He had merely been hiding and did not show himself. "I'm fine." Lan Zhuing nodded slightly, indicating that she was fine. Yin Yang Elder's face darkened. He glared at the Wolf Emperor cold and said, "Lord Wolf Emperor, if anything happens to Her Highness, I, Zhou Lianshan, will never let you off." It was a threat, a blatant threat. Lan Zhuing's identity was indeed not simple. Even Yin Yang Elder addressed her as Her Highness. Moreover, it seemed that Yin Yang Elder was secretly protecting Lan Zhuing. "Zhou Lianshan, it is not wise to threaten this emperor in Wolf Night City." The Wolf Emperor smiled coldly and his eyes flashed with a cold light. It was obvious that he did not take Yin Yang Elder's threat to heart. "Wolf Emperor, you should know what kind of person I, Zhou Lianshan, am." The corners of Yin Yang Old Man's mouth twitched as he solemnly said, "His Highness's identity is not something you can imagine. If anything happens to His Highness, your evil Moon Wolf tribe will be erased from the seventh sacred world of cultivators." Many people in the seventh sacred world of cultivators knew that Yin Yang Elder came from the high paradise sky, a powerful force in a high-rank sacred world. From the way he addressed Lan Zhuing and his attitude, one could guess that Lan Zhuing was from the high paradise sky and had a very high status at that. The Wolf Emperor narrowed his eyes and said in a Lan Zhuing, "Since Lady Lan has such a high status, she should not have come to participate in the Wolf Night battle." It seemed that he still did not accept Yin Yang Elder's threat. "You!" Yin Yang Elder's face sank. Just as he was about to say something, he was stopped by Lan Zhuing. The latter said, "Senior Brother Zhou, I am fine." Yin Yang old man frowned and nodded solemnly. He did not say anything else. Seeing this scene, Nie Tian could not help but frown, and his expression changed slightly. It was very strange that the Wolf Emperor did not care about Yin Yang Elder's threat at all. Could it be that Evil Moon Heavenly Wolf had a stronger backer? Could this backer be related to the Netherworld Emperor? At this time, the Wolf Emperor roared and loudly said, "The battle continues." The final winner of the battle between Lan Zhuiying and Nie Tian was Nie Tian. The next battle was between Qi Sha and Yin Liujie. Nie Tian, you are very lucky. Yin Liujie suddenly looked at Nie Tian and said with a cold smile, "But in the next round you are dead." With that said, he directly entered his divine soul space with a thought. At this time, Qi Sha was already waiting for him in the divine soul space. Nie Tian faintly smiled and murmured, "Humph, Yin Liujie, I'm afraid you will reach the next round."